Hi there. Yeah, okay. I think we're going to get started because that 5-minute break indeed was 15 minutes. First I'd like to welcome everyone to our panel on health and the built environment. Thank you for being here on this, it's a beautiful Saturday outside and 4:30 in the afternoon and you're still here, so thanks for that dedication. I want to start by thanking Stephen Yablon for helping us to organize this panel on health and the built environment. My name is Karen Lee. I'm Director of the Built Environment and Active Design Program at New York City's Health Department. My role today is to moderate this panel and to give an introduction on some of the health issues we faced in the past that we face today. And then we have a very distinguished panel who are going to tell us about their roles and the work that they're doing on the built environment, whether from an urban design and urban planning perspective, or landscape architecture or architecture, and to address these issues today from both the prevention side as well as the treatment side. So we're really excited about that. So on the panel today, we have Skye Duncan, who's an Associate Urban Designer at the Office of the Chief Urban Designer at New York City's Department of City Planning. She's been there since 2007 and has worked on a number of large-scale projects, including the west and northern shores of Staten Island, Hunters Point South, Riverside Center, NYU, Hallett's Point, Hudson Yards, Sheridan Hunts Point Study, Coney Island, and the Lower Concourse in the Bronx. She is a major contributor to significant national award-winning publications in New York City, including New York City Active Design Guidelines and Vision 2020, New York City's Comprehensive Waterfront Plan. She also teaches here at Columbia, and she received her Bachelor's of Architecture in Wellington, New Zealand, and then came here to do her Master's in Architecture and Urban Design at Columbia University as a Fulbright Scholar. Next, we have Hilary Sample, who is founding partner with Michael Meredith of the New York-based MOS Architects, which has a focus on arts, cultural, and institutional projects. Current notable projects include the Sterling Opera House in Derby, Connecticut, an orphanage in Kathmandu, Nepal, the Krabbesholm Højskoler Studios in Skive, Denmark, and Ballroom Marfa Drive-In Theater in Texas. Hilary is an associate professor and director of the Graduate Housing Studio Program at GSAPP. And I'm not sure if I got all those Danish words correct. Then we have Kate Orff, who's founding principal of SCAPE, a landscape architecture and urban design office based in Manhattan. SCAPE's projects range from a 1,000 square foot pocket park in Brooklyn to a 100-acre environmental center in Greenville, South Carolina, to a 1,000-acre landfill regeneration project in Dublin, Ireland. Kate graduated from the University of Virginia with distinction and holds a Master's of Landscape Architecture from Harvard University. And last but not least, we have Bob Frasca, who is partner in charge of the design firm ZGF Architects. Portfolios include civic and mixed-use buildings in Washington, D.C., Portland, Seattle, Kansas City, Denver, and embassy buildings worldwide for the U.S. Department of State. Bob has also designed a number of research, academic, and healthcare facilities, including the Zuckerman Research Center at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center here in New York City, which was one of the first high-rise LEED-certified research buildings in the country. Bob received his Bachelor's of Architecture from the University of Michigan and a Master's of City Planning from MIT. So with that, let's get started. So I'm going to start by introducing, as I said, some of the health issues that we have faced in basically cities around the world, including New York City. So in the past, in terms of the history of the intersection of health and the built environment, these were the types of things that we saw. 100 years ago here in New York City, there was severe overcrowding in Lower Manhattan, densities that reached 2 to 4 times to 6 times what we see today. And of course, inadequate systems for garbage, water, sewer, leading to pervasive filth and polluted water supplies. And because of the types of conditions that we saw, the epidemics that indeed occurred were related to those conditions. So crowding-related diseases like tuberculosis, which would pass from people to people and person to person under conditions of crowding and lack of ventilation. Waterborne diseases like cholera, vector-borne or insect-borne diseases like yellow fever. And the types of responses that occurred in the late 19th and early 20th centuries were indeed environmental and built environment responses in planning and urban design and even building design. And we see that in 1842, the Croton Aqueduct replaced the downtown pond for our water source, and immediately the cholera epidemics went away and never came back. In 1857, Central Park was built and hailed as ventilation for the working man's lungs. In 1881, the Department of Sanitation was created to clean the streets of all of the garbage and horse manure, et cetera, that would otherwise accumulate and never be removed. 1901, the Tenement House Act was passed and banned the construction of dark, airless tenement buildings. So now buildings in which people lived had to have light and air through the windows that were required. 1904, the first section of the subway opens. In fact, the subway was in large part constructed to address the severe overcrowding issues in Lower Manhattan, and now your population could live in Upper Manhattan and the Bronx and travel quickly down to Lower Manhattan for commerce and for work. And in 1916, a zoning ordinance was passed requiring buildings to be stepped back, allowing light and air into the streets. So this is the situation that you saw. In 1880, the leading causes of death, about 60% of deaths, infectious diseases. By 1940, 11% of deaths due to infectious diseases. Today, 9% of deaths due to infectious diseases. You can see that the gains that were made were very large in the pre-antibiotic era. We managed to reduce most of the deaths from infectious diseases prior to the advent of antibiotics. But continued gains occurred after antibiotics, though much smaller. That is to say that the environments that we design and build are critical to the types of diseases that you're going to see in society. So in the past, infectious diseases bred by the conditions of that day. Today, we live in what is known as an obesogenic environment, an environment which basically proliferates chronic diseases like heart disease, strokes, some of our cancers, and diabetes. And because many of these issues also address issues of physical inactivity and unhealthy diets, they are actually ultimately also linked to energy issues. So too much energy in the form of calories, too little energy out in the form of inactivity. And because of that, many of the design solutions around the built environment actually parallel sustainable design solutions. And so co-benefits and synergies actually abound from these solutions. So as I said, diseases we have to deal with today, chronic diseases, many of which result from energy imbalances. Here are the leading causes of death today: tobacco, followed by obesity, high blood pressure, high blood sugar, physical inactivity. And of course, physical inactivity and unhealthy diets contribute to the second, third, and fourth leading causes of death. Just want to show you some quick slides on obesity statistics that have been collected by the Centers for Disease Control in Atlanta since the mid-1980s. You could see that when they started collecting this data, 1985, there was no state with obesity rates in adults above 15%. And you'll see this map change extremely quickly, such that by 1991, there are multiple states above 15%, but it's not going to stop there. And by 1997, a new color, and again, not going to stop there. 2001, the vast majority of states above 20%. And then, of course, it doesn't stop there either. 2005, new color above 30%. By 2009, the vast majority of states above 25%, multiple states above 30%. Apparently, the 2011 data now has a state above 35%. The remaining state at 15% is Colorado. So following that, of course, are the epidemics of type 2 diabetes, and we're seeing type 2 diabetes also in younger and younger ages now. It used to be called adult onset diabetes when I was going to medical school because you rarely saw it in people under the age of 50, as in 50, and now we're increasingly seeing it in young people and in teenagers because of the obesity epidemic. In New York City today, 40% of children and 60% of adults overweight or obese. And over 70% of our deaths due to chronic diseases. So, and huge healthcare costs as well for employers as well as for society, about $150 billion a year. It's anticipated that if these trends continue, we're actually going to reach nearly $1 trillion in healthcare costs by 2030, and that's because nearly 90% of our population will be overweight or obese. And so, if we look at the environments in which we live, we know that with the rapidity in which this has occurred, that genetics probably did not play a role in these types of epidemics. Genetics, of course, play a role in disease, but because of how quickly the obesity and diabetes epidemics have occurred, as well as if you look around at our built environments, the built environment probably has a very significant role to play. So with that, I'm going to move into our panelists and our distinguished panel. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon. My name's Duncan, and I work at the Department of City Planning in the Urban Design Office, and also teach here. So I'm going to pick up where Karen left off today, and I'm going to give you an overview of a document called the Active Design Guidelines. Anyone in this audience seen these before? Great. That's very, very cool. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the aligning policies that we've been working on recently over the last few years. So to pick up the slide that Karen had up, you know, the idea that genetics, our genetics have not changed, right? It's our built environment, and we've really been busy kind of designing physical activity out of our daily lives. As it is today, less than half of US adults meet the physical activity recommendations. You can see these are, it's 150 minutes of moderate activity or 75 minutes of rigorous activity for adults per week, and for children it's 60 minutes a day. So, you know, Karen did a great job of kind of laying out the fact that there's this very clear relationship between health and the built environment. And so, you know, we began to ask ourselves, how do we design for daily physical activity and healthy food access in the cities that we live? So this is where the active design guidelines come in. And, you know, I wanted to give you an idea here of all the different players that are involved. And this was really an amazing effort of collaboration and interagency effort. And so you can see here from Department of Design and Construction, Health, City Planning, DOT, and, you know, we worked with academic partners as well to produce this document. And what's really great about it is that it's, you know, it's based on evidence. So, you know, when you pick it up, you get to look through whether it's strong, emerging, or best practice. The document has 4 chapters. The first chapter, Karen, kind of expands on what Karen was speaking about. Urban design, building design, and synergies with sustainable and universal design, and I will give you an overview of these. So if we start with urban design, you know, this begins with the idea of thinking about rich land use mix. So the more of these colors we can get together in these maps, the better. The more we can kind of create places that people can walk to school, to their jobs, to restaurants, to supermarkets, and, you know, that they have the option of living their life without having to hop in a car all the time. We talk about creating destinations for people to walk to, so parks and plazas and play areas, and making sure that, you know, we encourage through the guidelines that these are designed, you know, with the consideration of local cultures and appropriate age groups, and also just that they're well designed, that they're safe, that there's a variety of seating types, that they're well lit, so that people are enticed to go there. Pedestrian environment, one of the first things is we talk about traffic calming. How do we create safe places for people to walk and have, you know, moments for sitting down, as well as median refuge islands, so that for people who are not as able-bodied, you know, they feel safer going out, taking a walk and being able to cross the road. Also the streetscape. How do we think about places of rest to complement being active and walking? Again, you know, this is a big issue for elderly folk as well, so that they can walk a couple of blocks and have a sit down. Also things like street cafes and public art where possible. Another form of active transportation other than walking is obviously bicycling. And so this, we're really trying to encourage people to think about the comprehensive network of bicycling, and how do we provide signage and the kind of infrastructure in the city for people to support bicycling as well. And transit access. This is incredibly important because most of the time you take a train or a bus, you're going to walk 5 or 10 minutes to that bus station or the train station. And so you're inherently beginning to incorporate a little bit of physical activity into your daily routine. The building design chapter, again, looks at, we spoke about kind of bicycle parking infrastructure out on the street, but how do we then bring that into buildings and provide people a safe and secure place to park their bicycles? Recreational programming, this doesn't have to be expensive. How do we think of opportunities to allow people to be more physically active in the buildings and the buildings that you guys get to design? A big thing here is kind of co-location of adult and children facilities next to each other. People often say that they don't have enough time to go to the gym, or they need to watch the kids and so forth. So co-locating these things together is also a really important thing. Stairs, this is a big part of the active design guidelines. And we ask people to kind of think about the visual prominence of these. So how do you allow people to see the stairs, right? They used to be the big grand piece of a building. Slowly over the decades, they've been kind of relegated to the back corners, and no one even often knows where the staircase is. So how do we bring that forward? How do we design them in a way that entices people to use them? Think about visibility, fire-rated glass, maybe the use of a skip-stop elevator. Can you get natural light into them? Can you incorporate artwork and other forms of visual interest? And really, again, just entice people to use them so that they choose that over the elevator or the escalator. Putting motivational signage at the point of decision has also shown that this is going to increase stair use, and we've distributed a great number of these. The building exterior, now this is one of my favorites, because this is really about so many times architects forget to think about how their building is touching the ground, right? It's this beautiful object, but really how that building touches the sidewalk of the public realm has a huge impact on the walkability of that sidewalk and what it's like to walk down the street and whether you're enticing people to do so. So think about variety and detailing and texture and depth. How can you provide adequate transparency in multiple entries? And when you have to kind of set up this vertical rhythm to entice people down, and when you are designing stairs and ramps, how do you do it as kind of making it part of the feature of the building? Synergies with sustainable design. All of these are the fact that they're creating safer places to walk and for wheelchair travel. And it's also, making elevators available for the people who need to use them. I'm going to go very quickly through these, but just, Karen mentioned this, the idea that there's co-benefits of active design. The more we walk and take the stairs, the less we're using the elevator, electricity, and oil for transportation. The idea that active design can also strengthen our economy. We see here the reduced cost of compact growth compared to sprawl, that it saves people money, right? You're spending less of your own money, that it can actually create jobs, that we have the number of jobs here per dollar invested for just road infrastructure at the bottom and then pedestrian and bicycling above. And the people prefer smart growth, right? This is about creating a desirable place for people to live, work, and play. Again, in the document, we created a LEED physical activity innovation credit, and there's more information about that. But Via Verde, I know this was mentioned this morning by Michael Kimmelman, and this was one of the projects that actually used this, and we're seeing more and more buildings pick up on this now. So a few numbers just in the last couple of years, working on this effort through national awards, the number of cities we have mentored, we're working with, conferences we've spoken to. We've trained over 2,000 built environment professionals, distributed 15,000 copies of the ADG, both nationally and internationally. And then also those little green stair prompt signs, distributed a great deal of those as well. I'm going to go incredibly quickly through this section, but it's just to give you an idea of the overview. And all of these projects, if you are interested, you can look them up on the website and we can talk afterwards, but there's a lot more information. But this is about some of the efforts that the city has worked on in the last few years. So firstly, adding a public health chapter to Plan NYC was a great, this was in 2011, and this kind of crosses across all the issues in Plan NYC. At city planning, the whole city obviously is faced with 1 million new people by the year 2030. A big part of our job is figuring out where those people are going to live, work, play, and this shows how we concentrate that density. You see the areas in yellow are half a mile with a subway station, and within that area are all of our kind of approved and pending initiatives that we've been working on. Fresh is a program that the city worked on with EDC and Department of Health. And this was amazing. They did all this mapping where they looked at where are the highest rates of obesity and diabetes in the city, where are the areas that have the least access to fresh produce, put them on top of each other, almost carbon copy. So we designated areas in the city now to incentivize through tax incentives and zoning incentives for developers to include fresh food supermarkets. We passed zoning for bicycle parking. So the idea is now multifamily and commercial buildings are required to provide bicycle parking in their buildings. And to relieve the developer from that, we've also, we relieve some of the floor area that it takes to build that. Obviously, we don't all live in the middle of Manhattan. A lot of New York actually looks like this, and they are more automobile dependent. And so it's really important to think about the sidewalks in the pedestrian realm. What we were finding was that, we were getting curb cuts that were just happening everywhere, and it was destroying the kind of the fronts of the buildings as well as interrupting the sidewalk realm. So we revised those laws and the zoning, and so that now we can have more planting, more active frontages, and a more continuous pedestrian environment. POPs is something that came about in the 1960s. A developer gets a bonus for building a public space. Great idea, but we didn't really think about what those spaces were going to look like. We've recently revised the guidelines to include everything from safety, variety of seating, planting, signage, hours, and so that now, again, those parks and plazas that we talked about become like spaces people like to be in. Vision 2020, Comprehensive Waterfront Plan. This was taking, how do we manage over 500 miles of waterfront we have in the city? A number of goals, but one is to expand public access so that we can get people down to the water where possible, next to it, on it, in it, swimming to work, hopefully all of us one day soon. A big part of this is also making sure that we're keeping up to date, that cities are, our zoning codes were written, half a century ago. Car share didn't exist, right? That wasn't around. So we've had to go through and update the zoning to define what car share is and then establish rules. So the idea is people can walk more and live their life without a car but have access to it when they need it. We're also doing a lot of work at the regional scale with the HUD Sustainable Communities, where we're looking at what smart growth and how we can create these new communities around public transit access throughout the region. We're also working on, there's a series of 5 different appendix documents to the active design guidelines. One of them I wanted to mention was what we're calling Shaping the Sidewalk Experience. This is really where we think about sidewalk design across the nation, but from the perspective of putting the pedestrian within the space. So what we've done is we think about the sidewalk like a room that has 4 planes around it, and then we go into each of these and identify what are the different elements, physical elements that shape that space. The ground is most common, how people mostly think about the sidewalk, but the roadside is also really important. How street trees and lighting set up that rhythm. What's above you, the tree canopy, how tall are the buildings, how much sky are you seeing, and the building wall. How is it that, where you put the entries, the transparency, is it set back, all has a huge impact to play, and then we go into detail on each one of these, and we've kind of combed through zoning codes across the nation to provide examples of how zoning and planners can take on a level of responsibility, and architects actually, designers of creating, shaping that sidewalk experience. So 4 months, 5 people, 6 cities, and over 40 sidewalks that we intensely measured. Department of Transportation, we do a lot of work with these guys, and they're doing an incredible job to kind of change the way people are thinking about the public right-of-way across the city. Really thinking about how we can give back to the pedestrian space, both Times Square and Herald Square. I'm sure you've seen these. To the Plaza program where they're kind of working around the city where people have lack of access to open space, and how do we kind of take that away and give that back to the pedestrian environment where possible. Bicycle lanes has been a huge effort in the last few years where different bicycle lane types are going in depending on what the existing context is, but this has been over 260% in the last 10 years. That has increased to the infrastructure that supports bicycling, the parking and so forth. It's not all permanent, some of it's temporary. Programming is a big part of it. Sure, you've heard of summer streets and play streets where we close down streets and there's yoga classes, exercise classes, and I think one year there were swimming pools and dumpsters. And DOT is really big on numbers, right? So this is also supporting the fact that all of these changes that they're doing have, actually reduced traffic fatalities and grown ridership for bus and subways, increasing bicycling commuting. And actually there's a decline in the overall citywide traffic volumes and motor vehicle registrations. I want to close by just putting up the Highline. Again, I'm sure everyone knows this, but this is a great project just to talk about how we at the city try and align with the goals of the health goals of active design. And that, a project like this, just through thinking about the high quality of public open space, allows you to kind of improve the health of the economy, of the neighborhood around there through the West Chelsea rezoning, the health of the environment, the amount of kind of planting and new species of birds and butterflies that they're seeing there, to the health of the people, both socially giving them somewhere to go out and be social as well as active. So really our general approach is, no matter what we're doing, whether we're designing skyscrapers or sidewalks, is to think about it from the pedestrian's perspective. And that's how we try and strive for a healthier city. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. I also just want to thank you for inviting me to be a part of this symposium. One of the things that I have an architecture practice, but I also, my research, and I guess more so my academic research, is in the relationship between architecture, built environment, and health as one topic, something I've been working on for a couple of years. And I also teach the director of the housing program this year, just taking over from Michael Bell. And introduce one of the topics this time into the studio, have the students looking at health, some of them as an option, and we worked in East Harlem this past term, or in the fall, sorry, in the fall. And a year ago I was invited, along with my partner, to participate in the MoMA, joint MoMA and Buell Center Foreclosed Rehousing the American Dream project, which is currently in exhibition at MoMA. So this is a photograph taken in Orange. When we were invited to look at this project, there were 8 cities or suburban sites that were offered. I say cities because, in a way, Orange really is more urban than it is suburban, although presented in the context of the brief for the competition, saying that it was suburban. And what we found, actually, in a way, is that it falls more in line with urban condition than a suburban site. And so that was of interest to us, as well as it being in proximity to New York City. And being that I was already really interested in issues of health, one of the other things I teach is a seminar called Design and Disease, where I look at different types of buildings and architecture and architects that have historically always taken on health projects, which I think is something that has become such a specialized practice today, but it seems to be maybe gaining more in popularity that, let's say, maybe star architects or more mainstream architects are taking on health projects, which I think is very exciting. I think there's been a kind of, in the last 10, 20 years, obviously we've been interested more in fabrication technologies, parametric design, things like this that, let's say, do not necessarily focus on issues of social in architecture. And I think this is one thing I certainly struggle with myself, being an architect and designer. I'm interested in these in form, but I'm also interested in the social. So, and one of the things in our practice we've tried to do is create more, let's say, ideas about representation that can become a social project. So, in any case, I think I'm going to go quickly through a couple of things. One is I want to present the foreclosed project that we made, and then also present a few brief points about some of the research that I've been doing. So the project we titled in the end was called Thoughts for a Walking City, and basically looking at the idea of Orange as essentially these kind of foreclosed properties, but not just the kind of physical foreclosedness of the houses or other types of buildings, but also just in this one particular area of Orange, the downtown sort of central part, that it was very much about a kind of foreclosed lifestyle. Let's say that there were, and there are very limited points of access to, let's say, fresh food, to jobs, that this particular community becomes very isolated, is physically cut off from the main street of Orange by 280 highway, which is a depressed highway, so you have to cross bridges. It's completely unhospitable in a way, and so that there is a kind of visible pain, I think, that is expressed now in the city and context of Orange. And so these are some of the images I should be showing. And so, as I had mentioned, one of the things we decided that we would look at, and why we picked Orange as opposed to some of the other sites that were offered, which I won't go into all of them, but the proximity to New York City, and that it is basically a 20-minute drive, about a little bit more than a half an hour commute by train to Orange. And so already that there was a kind of public transportation available was something that was very important to us also. We didn't have to invent or rely on the idea that in the future there would be a kind of high-speed transportation or even normal, let's say, train, bus service, which some of the other sites in the competition opposed, that you had to sort of assume that that was going to just happen. We were more interested in already working with existing, let's say, facts, and so you can see the kind of close proximity. And I think more people are probably familiar with South Orange is very successful commercially in terms of also living, which is further west. And so people will commute further to live in South Orange as opposed to Orange. For instance, that was sort of one thing that struck us right away as a kind of strange situation. And so it's interesting. I mean, Sky, I think you really helped set me up here for my presentation, but we did look to Bloomberg's plan, 2030 plan, for some of the points, as well as part of the competition. And our team that we worked with included people like Kelly Brunel from the Yale University Rudd Center, specializing in sort of studying obesity. And Kelly advised us and pointed us in directions to look at certain studies for the kind of exercise and physical activity, so that some of the things that became important to us were really this issue of walking. And knowing that the Bloomberg plan, and because you know, the plan in New York City leads the country in many ways for some of these health initiatives, was something that was very exciting to us, thinking that we could try to look at this now, not in New York, but what happens in a place like Orange? Can you start to implement some of these ideas within that? So we looked at the idea of this central train station. This is the highway that I mentioned here. So you can really see Main Street is kind of along here. And we worked primarily in this kind of neighborhood just to the south. And what you start to see in the neighborhood, which includes a kind of 1910 historic, let's say, neighborhood, and it really is more of a kind of neighborhood as opposed to this being really considered suburbia, because you can start to see that there are larger industrial sites, larger buildings within this particular neighborhood that we were working in. And that was something that was very interesting to us in terms of typology and developing this new vision for kind of housing. And one of the sites is an old hospital that's been abandoned, I'll show in a minute. But the idea that you could walk within a half a mile, and where would that put you in terms of location to the train station, and then starting to develop a kind of bigger density. So one of the other things that we started to look at was really the idea of rethinking walking altogether as a problem, let's say, or as a contemporary lifestyle. And that included looking then at ideas of the streets and really trying to understand the cost implication of maintaining streets, where in fact there's not a lot of cars actually in downtown Orange, where walking could become a possibility as a real main way to sort of communicate and move about the city. And so what we found is that what if you took all of the money that was spent every year into maintaining the streets and put that into housing? And so you know, the idea that walking, you know, I think especially in New Jersey, and you know, the idea that you would abandon your car altogether seems completely absurd. But the idea that we could try to reduce that some level and really try to make a case for walking. And so, you know, the High Line, obviously, Philadelphia is looking at redoing their old infrastructure. Atlanta has also taken on a new project in the last few years, building something like 22 miles of walking space. So all of these things seem to be more and more, I think, in the kind of culture, and how can we start to tap into that? This is a map of, sorry, it's not really showing up too well here, but this is Manhattan here. This is, maybe you guys have read about this in the newspapers, but Matt Green, a young man who has decided he's going to walk all, something like 8,000 miles, 8,000 streets of New York City, and these are the streets that he's already walked in his venture. But the idea that walking really can become something that can generate a plan for architecture. These are some of the other photographs of Orange that we took, and we made several films and movies. But you can start to see that the city had actually introduced a parking lot in the park, in the kind of main park, and supposedly this is really used a lot. It's increased activity in the park, although we really found no evidence of that. The parking lot always seemed to be empty when we were there. So we really questioned that as a kind of motive. So just to kind of continue the kind of slideshow of things, abandoned, car services. You notice there's not really cars on the streets. And so completely empty, always empty, vacant lots. We started to really question this idea then, could you abandon the streets altogether and actually build in the streets? And so this model is showing a kind of site model of that half-mile radius from the train station, which is here, and then really just filling the streets in with housing. So this is our model. We were interested in low rise, high density, very narrow kind of buildings that are thin, that can create these sort of public courtyards that you can walk through. Again, working with a collaborative team of Atelier 10 here in New York, we were able to talk about the idea of thinness and having air and light come through, large-scale windows, a kind of roof terrace. The models are all very abstract, but these were sort of some of the intentions. Ideas of having bike lanes, pedestrian routes, as some of sort of alleyways, but up against the kind of existing foreclosed buildings, all with the idea that over time this could become ruin, and in a way the public and private that the city once knew would flip, so that the housing becomes in the street, becomes very public, public and private, but that what had been private becomes now a kind of overgrown park. Kind of plan to show this sort of idea. And furthering just very large scale windows and open. One of the things we thought about for the housing also was a kind of rethinking the zoning altogether so that you could intermix both commercial, retail, and living, which is already something that happens in Orange, and we took a kind of cue from that. Some of the idea also for the skin is a kind of aerated concrete, which sort of plays off Thomas Edison's concrete house that he made. And one of the things also is that we were very interested in a kind of less design, and so this is an image of Le Corbusier's Passaic housing, which Ada Louise Huxtable writes about in the New York Times article in 1980, where she describes it really as something that she said, "I went to Passaic prepared for the worst. Everything I had ever heard about it led to expectations of a failed experiment, an aesthetic slum, a testament to the miscarriage of modernism and the arrogance of its architects. This did not turn out to be the case. The Passaic housing, a landmark of early modernism, is now more than 50 years old. It looks, and it doesn't look, like Le Corbusier's original design." Essentially, so that was 30 years ago that she wrote about this housing project, but what happens is that each individual owner can then essentially change the housing project to whatever they wish, and that's something we were very interested in with our project. So while it may look a little bit rough, the intention was that it could potentially take on this kind of change. One of the things also we were interested in is creating these spaces, much more kind of public spaces, so that the street widens and opens up. Something that I'm interested in through the Smithson's work, Allison and Peter Smithson, in their Robin Hood Gardens housing project, where they do this, one of my favorite drawings, it's called a stress-free zone, where they actually make this kind of large green mound. If you look at photographs of the work, which I'm not going to show today, but and they have these small little sketches indicating much larger sort of urban infrastructure that's kind of going all around. So you can imagine this sort of incredibly noisy environment all around this sort of free, stress-free zone, and these kind of small, what look like to me almost like footprints, people walking, but I don't know for sure that that's what that is. So that is kind of the idea about the housing project, and just really quickly I want to talk about the idea then from Orange, the kind of central train station, to its main hospital, which is right in the heart of the neighborhood we worked in. This is what it looks like, has been abandoned, and how hospitals in other cities have become the place of a kind of new trend and revitalization. And so this became one of the things that we looked at as part of our project, how in fact if this could be rethought would help develop into the kind of housing projects and think about these other types of urban spaces. So I think just for time maybe I'll end here, but just one of the things, the other research that I've been working on is this idea that's presented here is called the Richter scale for health epidemics, and how we can start to think about maybe this idea of Richter scale in other modes of design. So thank you.
I think I'm pressing the right button. I make buildings, and I think about the same kinds of things that the rest of the panels have been talking about, but mostly it has to do with actually implementing these things in very, very direct ways. And really talking about evidence-based design and talking about really these issues that I think go into most of the buildings that we're doing. I'm really talking about healthcare buildings. And it has to do with all of these things, whether it's a retention of the staff, whether it's the transformation of the whole idea of healthcare. And what I'm going to do is sort of show you some projects that really deal with this. And this happens to be a children's hospital in Portland, Oregon. And it was a building that we barely had air rights. It was connecting two sides of a campus. And I wanted to find a way to make it a very humane kind of a place. And I happened to be looking through a magazine, and I saw an ad for Air France. This happens to be one of the lobbies, but the thing that sort of provoked this idea was this Air France ad, and it showed a French hotel. And I thought, this is the kind of scale that would be important for this kind of a building. And I remember something that Charlie Moore said. He said that Goldilocks really understood things that architects spend most of their lives trying to understand. She knew when things were too big or too small or too hot or too cold, but she always knew when things were just right. So what I was trying to do was make places that were just right. And this happens to be one of the courtyards that the patient rooms look out on. And so if one was good, I made actually 3 of them. That one was for the staff, this one was for the parents, and this one was for the children. And the objects in it were actually designed by the art program that we had. So this is where the idea and the sort of the physical circumstance really deals with building places that I think are for wellness. Now at another scale, community hospital that I did, actually in a residential area, the idea was landscape. And we had the opportunity to make a park in the center of this. And the other thing that we had an opportunity to do was to connect the outpatient clinics and the hospital and the parking and so forth. But the thing that was important to me was that as you approach this place, and this happens to be in the state of Washington, but it would be true here, on a winter day when it's dark and cold and rainy, I wanted a feeling of optimism. So the circulation towers, those are stairwells and elevators, made of glass block so that they would glow and it would be an inviting place. And the idea of a healing garden on the third level. And it had to do with plants that really dealt with that. It was accessible to the patients and people that worked there. And there was a chapel there, so we're bringing together the temporal and the and beyond. And again, bringing together art and landscape. The thing I liked about this is the landscape is sort of in the center of it. And that was really the idea. Parents with buggies on weekends would be using our garden. So it really was the idea of the building really tithing to the community, which I always think is a very, very important kind of a thing to do. In a very different place, in Boston, a cancer center for Dana-Farber, which is a part of the Harvard Medical Center. Those of you that may have been there, you can see our red building in the center of it. There's a series of hospitals and research institutions. It's really a very inhumane place. And what we wanted to do was to make something in that complex that was, and I'm only going to show you one aspect, which is the healing garden. So we didn't have any real estate, but we had the opportunity on the third level to have a healing garden that was enclosed and looked down onto Brookline and Jimmy Fund Way and a park that was across the street. And this is the interior of it. So there are plants. People could come in with wheelchairs. They come in with their families. That was very important. And then right off of it, there was another place for the patients that had, immune problems, and they could look into the healing garden. So essentially what we were trying to do is to embrace this community in very, very direct ways. And talked about talking and walking. And what we did is we set the building back 15 or 20 feet. This is commemorating the mass bicycle race that is one of the huge benefactors of Dana-Farber. There's places to sit, people to have coffee, but it really injects, I think, a very, very small piece of humanity in this particular part of Boston. But on a very different scale, Children's Hospital that I finished in Denver, which is about 1 million square feet, and we're adding another 500,000. This happens to be just outside of the cafeteria. So that we're really embracing the natural environment in a very direct way. But the interior is one that really contributes to the readability of the place. And to me, that's a very, very important part of any building, so that when you're on the inside, you can find things. You can go from one place to another. You can identify objects. I remember, Kevin Lynch in The Image of the City. Some of you may have remembered that, where there are clues on how you can get from one place to another. It's a skylit place, and the art really has to do with the people that are there. And so it was the art that was really designed by a whole series of artists that we collaborated with. And it's one that, in fact, functions on a very, very direct way on a day-to-day basis. And this picture I really love. It doesn't say much about architecture, but it has a lot to do about life in that particular part of the world. And one that we just completed at Children's Hospital in Portland, Oregon, in a very challenged part of the city, and existing buildings around it. This is the lobby with a coffee shop that opens to an outdoor space that I will show you in a moment. And this is the lower level of that outdoor space that is designed so that the kids and the parents and the families can use it. And it looks down onto this roof deck. This happens to be the oncology area that's on that. And what it is used for, in addition to recreation, is that there are several cultures that when a child is going to die, they want the child to be outdoors under the sky. And it's used that way. As a matter of fact, on the Denver Children's Hospital, we designed a garden for the exact same purpose. Previously, in their old building, they took the kids up to the top level of the parking garage. But the whole idea is to be able to make these kinds of places more humane and really directly relate to the people that are using them and the whole idea of the healing process in the very, very broadest sense. And just another view of that same place, again, working with a variety of artists to make very special places for this particular set of individuals. This happens to be a place right off of that where the staff and the parents could be. And it is one that really tries to embrace the healers and the people that are being healed, or the families that are taking care of them. And again, these are the most vulnerable people, and we try to find ways to really deal with that. This is the place for the parents. Off of that, there's a kitchen, there's places where they can look at their computers, there's views of the city, there's washers and dryers there. And so they are brought into the community, but sometimes they're spending days, weeks, in some cases even months there. This happens to be the play area for kids that can't get around, and siblings. Didn't show much about the patient rooms, but there's the couches that open up into beds so that the parents can stay there overnight, again, bringing natural light in ways that, and this happens to be the corridor that connects to the old hospital. And the idea was to be able to have a whole series of events, and artists did this that we collaborated with. And now, really, to take it back to something that I think maybe more of you can relate to, at least those of you that are from New York. This happens to be Atlantic Avenue in Brooklyn. And we were asked to do a infusion center for Sloan Kettering, so that people that lived in this area would not have to commute to Manhattan. And the idea of it was to really make it like a storefront. And as a matter of fact, people would come by and try to buy furniture. They'd walk in and think it was a furniture shop. But the idea, in addition to dealing with cure, is to embrace the neighborhood. This is the interior of that space. Again, it didn't have a lot of natural light, but we made it a very uplifting kind of place. And the thing that's happened, we found out, is that not only do the people from the community who need infusion come there, but their neighbors come. Some of them come with their groceries and sit around and talk with the patients while they're there for 2 or 3 or 4 hours, and sometimes even longer. There are books, there's a coffee shop. There are ways that it really can demystify the whole notion of cancer, which is very important. This happens to be an infusion chair, but this happens to be a private one, but there are some where the people are in groups. And sometimes people want to talk to other people, sometimes they want to be by themselves. And so the space deals with that. Again, I mentioned the books, places that people can go, and it, I think, deals with medicine in a way where we are bringing it to the individuals, regardless of where they live, in very, very different ways. And now that we are in the process nationally of reevaluating our whole healthcare system, I really think that the quality of the built environment is going to play an important role in whatever it is we do. If you're talking about finding ways to spend less on healthcare but get more for it, it may be that the spaces that we build can contribute in very profound ways to that. And so I would kind of leave you with that thought, is that it is something that regardless of where we are, whether you're in Portland, Oregon, which has really its own sort of kind of culture. I mean, if you've seen Portlandia, you know what most of the places. As a matter of fact, there was an article in the New York Times this week where in Portland, when the chickens can't lay eggs anymore. They have retirement places for them. And this one place has retired 1,000 chickens now. In New York, they probably make stew out of them, but in Portland, they have a sort of different idea. But I think that the thing that really binds this all together is really dealing with individuals in ways that really affect them and can affect the way that the whole healing process and health can be addressed.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks very much. Okay, I'm Kate Orff. I'm an assistant professor here and also the founder of a landscape architecture company called GSAPP. But today I'm going to talk about a book that I wrote about 2 years ago that's on press now, and it's called Petrochemical America. So it's going to be a little bit of a scale shift for you because I'm going to be talking about the sort of regional dynamics of health and the reciprocity between kind of American consumption patterns and you know, almost sort of building systems and the health of and our health, our public health. So the book is a collaboration with the photographer Richard Misrak, who's been called the greatest American photographer of his generation. He often photographs human-made landscapes. Often he photographed the bombing of the desert, the American desert. And he went to this region in southern Louisiana in 1997 and photographed it. The region has been called Cancer Alley, and it's really located between Baton Rouge and New Orleans. The reason it's called Cancer Alley is because there are over 100 petrochemical facilities and oil refineries that have contributed to reports of unusually high cancer rates in the region, in addition to many other related suites of ailments like asthma, stillbirths, et cetera, et cetera. So this project is really one that was conducted outside in the field, and actually this is a picture of, well, I guess me and then two people from my office and Willie Fontenot, who is a citizen activist and community organizer, and what we're doing is kind of trying to stare at and understand the dynamics between the sort of abandoned Dow chemical plant in the background, and there was a rusting styrene tank immediately to the left of the image, which of course goes, you probably all know, goes into the sort of Dow styrene wallboard that is ubiquitous in the American building system. But you can see in the foreground there's a cemetery. And so this project, Cancer Alley, is really about trying to understand the adjacencies and the unusual aspects of this place in which these massive petrochemical facilities are situated immediately next to poor communities. So this is one of Richard's photographs of the Mississippi River. And so when I talk about environmental health, it's not just about these poor communities who disproportionately bear the burdens of the American consumption patterns, being whether it's from the building industry or the toys or tires, all the billions and millions of products that go into our shampoo, that go into facilitating our daily lives. This is a photograph of the Mississippi River, and when I see it, you know, you can see obviously a poor settlement sort of on stilts, but you have tires in the foreground and also vinyl wallboard in the foreground. So just to me, and just in this very one image, it's a sort of complex portrait of this dynamic between an incredibly unhealthy and polluted environment and actually the complexity of that environment in that the Dow chemical facility that in fact manufactured many of the chemicals that go into the detritus in the foreground is just above the levee. This is an image which is called the Norco-cumulus cloud. If you look at this very beautiful image, it's kind of disturbing to note, but in fact this is an artificial weather pattern that's been created by the emissions from the Norco plant, which is in the background. So not only have we created this kind of massive American landscape that's been, that I call sort of a machine for consuming oil and petrochemistry and petrochemical products, but we've in fact made our own weather. So this view, which is an iconic view of Cancer Alley, again shows what's literally there, which is a Taft chemical plant in the background, and what remains of what was a very vibrant settlement in the foreground. And it's in Cancer Alley, there are these remarkable juxtapositions of former, layers of former towns, whether it's just a driveway or a housing pad or a cemetery, which is sort of the last remaining piece that cannot be moved. And so our project was really to try to understand exactly what the dynamics were and how that was made. So the book is, it has basically 60 maps, 60 of these maps that are interwoven and sort of unfold this broader narrative about the American landscape and look in a great detail at this region, which has gone from this sort of meander of the early Mississippi to when it was straightened and levied to and characterized by plantation homes along this sort of arpent pattern, and finally, in sort of towards today, which is when these large plantations were consolidated and purchased by huge industry, Dow, ExxonMobil, et cetera, all are here. So this is a kind of map of the chapters of the book. We move from the first chapter is oil, we move into infrastructure, waste, displacement, food, ecology, and then back to landscape. So unfortunately, I would love to talk about all these chapters, and I think many of them circle back directly to the themes that Karen opened up with, but I've just selected a couple of images here and really zoomed in on these first, this suite of chapters to talk more directly about the health crisis in this area, which also ties back into the sort of health crisis, I think, in the larger United States. So, but the project, and I wish this is a topic of a different lecture, but it was a kind of way of looking at Richard's photographs and not only going to the site, but actually using his photographs as a site for the investigation. So this is an image of a kind of a sunset, but if you've been in the lower Mississippi, you can kind of see this incredibly beautiful refraction, but that's in fact caused by pollution. And so my concept in the book was to kind of unfurl these photographs and position them within a kind of global, regional, local context. This is the first chapter called Oil, and a map of that chapter and how we integrate the photographs. And here's the photograph bracketed on the right side of the page there. But I think, in the book I tried to understand how have Americans gotten down this path? And it's really only been, just over 100 years that has characterized the age of oil. And you can see the book overlays kind of cross-sections of Richard's photographs with environmental data and information to kind of build a rich portrait of environmental health and analysis. So this drawing overlays why oil, why is the lower Mississippi, it's kind of ground zero for oil production. And here we have overlaid a graph of carbon emissions, which have, of course, gone off the chart. And this zone, what I think is fascinating is the zone it's also, as an architect or a maker of things, you're also equally proud of that things are still made here. This is just a snapshot into the many, many petrochemicals that are made here. And I think what's important is that not only do they go into Americans' cars and plastics and shampoo bottles and so on, but they go into architecture in the form of PVC plastic, which goes into not only sort of doors, but has an incredibly toxic byproduct called vinyl chloride monomer, which has gotten into the drinking water of several communities in this area, but is also, frankly, in hospital IV bags. So creating a circle of health. We have this chapter on infrastructure, which is just quite fascinating and showing how the geology of Louisiana, in terms of the form of these salt domes that are miles deep and the deep water ports, combine with a sort of natural and hybrid of natural and artificial infrastructures to create this incredible set of environmental situation that is great for industry, but in fact, this industry is layered upon communities of formerly freed slaves and these former plantation homes, and has created what is in fact quite volatile mix of waste, industrial waste, and people's lives. So I talked about that tire in the foreground of Richard's image. Here's a kind of snapshot into a photograph of how natural gas, which is extracted from the Gulf of Mexico, will come into one of these plants, be cracked through a steam cracker, and out comes butadiene and other related petrochemicals. And polybutadiene goes into butadiene, which goes into tires. So here we kind of come full circle in terms of what is, petrochemical America. It's this extraction-based economy that goes through this beautiful and, in fact, a technologically amazing set of processes, but then comes out the other end in terms of waste and, of course, products for us that we all use, but has a disproportionate effect on people who live there. And there's our tire. Here's a view into oil derricks in the Gulf. To me, this is a view which is wondrous, but at the same time shows, I hate to use the health word addiction, but shows the American addiction to oil and gas, and also portends to my next chapter. We have the Deepwater Horizon spill located here that happened during the writing of the book, and the extent of that spill and the effects of hydrocarbons and so on in the environment are still being felt today. There's a zoom into the Deepwater Horizon accident. And I think the next chapter goes into, which is titled Waste, shows how, of course, accidents are part of doing business, right? This one was anomalous only in its size, but waste, if waste in a ecological system is typically reintegrated, waste in many industrial processes is considered an externality and is either released into the ground legally or illegally or out into the air or into our waters. This is a map really of Cancer Alley, so to speak, and showing how the way that we made this book is overlaying data sets. And so it's showing legal releases of toxics release inventory overlaid with a narrative description of accidents and illegal releases. So, for example, Gonzales here is a town located quite near to this vinyl plant, quite near to some very serious PVC and atrazine contamination. And in fact, in Gonzales, very sadly, there was a group of 4 children who suffered from rhabdomyosarcoma, which is an incredibly rare form of brain cancer, just about 10 years ago, just in this one street within Gonzales. So it's an incredibly, it's a serious issue. And this talks about how waste is stored in the landscape, both legally and illegally, but it's also stored in our bodies, in the bodies of animals and people. Many relating to this story of the rise in obesity, I think cannot be overlooked, that with the rise in petrochemicals that's really happened since the 50s and 60s, there's been a rise in the release of known endocrine disruptors into the environment as well. Atrazine is one of the major items that we put on our crops, and it is a known endocrine disruptor and has severely disrupted, for example, metabolism, and has caused hermaphrodism in frogs. So one has to wonder what it causes in humans as well. I was pregnant when I wrote this book too, so I think that some of these issues were incredibly heightened. And this chapter, called Displacement, highlights how communities have been displaced by this movement of large plants. This is just the story of one called Morrisonville that was relocated inside the levee, and once Dow came in, then the community was then relocated again because of an incredible amount of contamination, groundwater contamination. And this is one of the maps that we're proudest about because it begins to collate and synthesize all of the stories of all of these communities and show how, in fact, that there has been a wholesale displacement of lives, and that, of course, we all benefit from many of these projects, but the burdens of our consumptive-based lifestyles are borne often locally. Now, America is somewhat of a success story. We passed the Environmental Justice Act during the Clinton administration. There are many new environmental regulations which are constantly being under threat. But the reality is that these these practices have frankly moved overseas into locations that have more suspect political and empowered of their people. So this is all to say that the end of the book includes this glossary of terms and solutions for a post-petrochemical culture, where we map the processes and we show ideas about how to break those processes. And so that is really a big part of the book, is trying to show what can be done at not only the individual level, but a collective governmental level, and at the level of a community-based organization, to begin to intervene in what I see as this sort of spiraling of negative health impacts. Thank you.
So I want to thank our health panel, health and built environment panel. We're all going to convene up front now to take some questions and to finish up with some discussion. Thank you. Okay, I think we'll just start with questions in the interest of time. So I see some hands up on the left side of the room.
Thank you. Hello. First, I'd like to thank the framers of this forum, because there's some amazing and fascinating connections between all three chapters, and it's great to think about. And I don't really have a direct question, I'm sorry, but I have a kind of a sense or a kind of irony that's going on, and that is in a previous presentation, there was some statistics about the increased mortality rate, that is our death age is increased over the past years, yet in the last presentation we're talking about increased cancer rates. And so there's an interesting, for me, relationship between, or a balance, trying to discover a balance between what is sustainable and what is healthy, and how our death rates have, our age has increased. And I just want you to comment on sort of this balance that we're trying to achieve, because there's no obvious perfectibility here. I mean, we're all mortal, right? And so I'm wondering how we understand the balance between the productivity that we have because of our industry and the health rate, the health benefits that gives us, and the health benefits that you're talking about with walkability and so forth. I don't know if that's a question, but just kind of a discussion about the balance that we try to achieve, as opposed to, some perfection, some ideal perfection that's not possible.
Okay, I guess I'll start, and I'll ask our panel to join in. I guess the question is, I think what you're saying is that certainly with industrialization and with technological progress, that has given us benefits, clearly societal benefits in terms of production, et cetera, that also can enhance health and well-being. I think one of the things that's happened, of course, is that many of the things I think that are consequences that also have health consequences that have occurred are not necessarily intentional things that happened. They were unintentional. And so, for example, when we created better ways or when we created ways of moving human beings that didn't require their own sort of energy, there were benefits to be had. Like we could now travel much greater distances to do business, to learn about other cultures, etc. But inadvertently, for the short trips, which we also utilize, things like automobiles for, they have unintended consequences, of course, of generating pollution that's unneeded, of creating health consequences in terms of inactivity and obesity that's unneeded. I think it behooves us that, some of these unintended consequences that have occurred, right? But we are now aware that they are there. And because of that awareness, it gives us actually an opportunity to potentially intentionally correct some of those issues, right? And so I'm not suggesting that, I agree with you, it's not about throwing out the baby with the bathwater, but it is about finding, I think, that balance that would allow us to utilize the technologies in ways that are productive and that actually enhance our health and well-being and lives. But, you know, being aware of the unintended consequences also address that in a very conscientious and conscious manner. So I would start by saying that, and I think our panel should, if they have any comments to add.
Well, I think the unintended consequences part of that is huge, and there are so many different windows into that discussion. One of course is food. You know, just to pick up on the obesity discussion, that clearly there's much that can be done at the neighborhood scale, but also at the scale of the nation. One of a fascinating thing that we mapped in the book was that clearly the green revolution was done with the best of consequences: better fertilizer, access to pesticides, and so on, have increased crop yields exponentially. But there's a dynamic now in the Midwest, and that happens between the Midwest and the lower Mississippi, where the atrazine and the nitrogen fertilizers that are being placed essentially in the watershed of the Mississippi, which is our most fertile zone, are, you know, the excess of those chemicals is washed down the Mississippi and then floods out into the Gulf. So you basically have created unintentionally created a massive dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico, which was formerly the site of this incredible productive seafood, rich in omega-3s like shrimp, oysters, seafood, tuna. And so the benefits or the aspirations of the Green Revolution have unintentionally created a surplus of corn and soy. And last, I think 2 years ago, the Louisiana shrimp catch was the lowest ever on record. So we have exponentially increased a certain type of food, but also decimated a different type of food which has a different suite of values and a completely different set of rich, high proteins. So there's the notion of balance, I think, is an important one, because ideally those systems would be recalibrated so that one does not succeed at the expense of the other, for the American diet as well. They said the American diet.
Yes. Philip Logan, class of '82. I have a small architecture landscape firm in East Village called Preservation Green. Back to specifics regarding guidelines in the city. One of the tax incentives in the city is to produce green roofs on buildings, and it's primarily generated to help with stormwater. But it seems to me that there would be a very, if we had the support of your organization to actually, with, you know, in terms of a health thing, if there was a mandate in the city that all new roofs had to be green and planted, you would increase the health in the city tremendously, because everybody would be out there tending, because we have a green roof, and we're constantly out there weeding it, and there'd be ways to create, you know, even vegetable gardens on the roof. And if there was a mandate, or at least a stronger tax incentive, because right now there isn't, the tax incentive isn't strong enough to really support,
Sure.
You know, putting them in place.
Yeah, I can speak to that. One of the things, you know, to mandate something all the time can be a really tricky path to go down. And one of the things we've actually done recently is looking at removing impediments in the city. It's up for city council vote, or it was voted on yesterday, but is a program that we did called Zone Green, which looks citywide at how we can kind of remove impediments in our zoning resolution for New York to allow renewable energies, to solar panels and wind turbines to be put on rooftops. We have addressed green roofs and greenhouses as part of that effort. So it's very, very difficult. We could never go and require every building in the city to have this, but what we've done is we've taken the first steps to removing impediments for people who want to be able to do it. You know, at the same time, DEP, is the Department of Environmental Protection, is also, you know, they are kind of looking at increasing the amount of water that each building has to retain on site. So, you know, we try to kind of come at these issues from multiple directions and be smart about it. It's, you know, it's not always, it sounds like a great idea often to just mandate this and mandate that, but there's a lot of competing things if you look at New York City rooftops as well, and there's fire issues and fire codes, and but yeah, so we're starting to try and encourage them. I couldn't answer that question, I'm sorry. I don't know.
the mental health is not part of it. Because a lot of things related to inaction, and it's part of depression, it's part of anxiety. So I think that mental health in this kind of table should be very important component, and even more so when a lot of medications related to mental health at the end finished in our drinking water.
Okay, I'll start and see if the panelists information to add as well. Yes, I think you're correct that mental health issues are also an increasingly important issue globally, as well as in, domestically. If you look at sort of the leading causes of death, I presented the leading causes of death, right, being tobacco, obesity, high blood pressure, high blood sugar, which is associated with diabetes, and then physical inactivity. So those are the leading causes of death. But if you look at the leading causes of morbidity, such as, for example, hospitalization, even on a global scale, you're absolutely right, that issues of mental illness and mental health play a really large role in that. And so I think the exclusion was not intentional. I think one of the things that we've been actively doing, for example, in the city, is to try to address, we've done a lot of work on tobacco. Now we're going down to obesity as the second leading cause of death. We are trying, I think if you look at where prevention can make an impact, there is, ample evidence of what can be done now around issues around, for example, tobacco and obesity. I think in terms of the prevention of mental illness, issues like depression, anxiety, schizophrenia and stuff, there's good, I think, evidence of the types of things that can be done to help prevent relapse of some of these issues. Actual prevention of the onset of these types of illnesses are not necessarily as well known. And I think that's one of the challenges. The other is, some of the physical risk factors like physical activity actually is increasingly showing evidence of associations with mental health. So for example, being routinely physically active can actually help to protect against depression and anxiety. And I know that, for example, there are places where primary treatments for mild and moderate depression and anxiety, for example, in teens, is actually physical activity groups that gets them not only moving but also socializing. So I think that there are sort of intricate links that are of importance, even to some of the physical risk factors that we're talking about. But I think you're right, that the mental health issues are important ones. We should probably highlight them. The issue is, in terms of, what can we do specifically to prevent the onset of some of the psychiatric illnesses is not necessarily, I think, as well known. Do others have anything to add to that?
I would just add that in the neighborhood that we were working in Orange, there's kind of 3 immigrant populations that come together, and that's the only population group, and that their kind of physical isolation from the main street and from other neighborhoods based on just the organization of the town does create this kind of stress. So that is something that we talked with a social psychologist about, Mindy Fullylove, who's actually a resident of Orange her whole life, and she's in the faculty here at Columbia in the public health school, Mailman, and has written a book called Root Shock, and talks about the kind of, it takes about 3 generations for immigrants to really sort of establish themselves. There's a whole sort of level of that. And in the kind of precedent research, I showed the image of the Smithson's project where they created this kind of stress-free zone. So those were things we were interested in looking at in the proposal.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry, actually, can we start with this gentleman here? Because I think he had his hand up prior. Sorry about that.
Well, thank you. Flash answers. Bob, I quelled, I almost wept. Wonderful presentation. Per medical procedure performed, would you say that the dollars or the square feet involved in your facilities would be above the national average? Kate, I'm looking at Bob and me adding our ages. It seems to me that an organic chemist would have to be about our combined ages to have put all those names of compounds on that long a stretch of river on the map. and then you turned around and did it for public health, and you did it again for geology. How in the world did you put together all that research? Hilary, can a town like Orange afford open spaces and great vistas? How do you bring that, considering what you just said about the psychology in the community, how can you bring that to that particular population? Sky, have you ever considered having a design competition for physical activity-based projects, just to kind of get that further out? Karen, since we paid you to produce it, is your slideshow on the web? And since we paid you to produce it, since you're with the city, you're not allowed to answer no.
Bob, do you want to start?
Well, I mean, you talked about the cost of our projects. They're in line with the cost of all medical facilities because, I mean, everyone's dealing with the same dollars. They're dealing with the same set of circumstances. I think the things that vary are the sensibilities of the people in the communities and how they want to address this whole issue of wellness. And it's especially conspicuous, I think, in children's hospitals. That was the reason I probably showed you more children's hospitals than others, because they are so vulnerable and they can't deal with the issues by themselves. As a matter of fact, their parents oftentimes had some of the same kind of problems. So what we try to do is to make places that are accessible and that relieve stress in physical ways. I think the things that the rest of the panelists have talked about are probably a lot more profound. But what we deal with is sort of the end result, and how can we affect one human being in one place at a particular point in time, and then the people that care for them, who are incredibly stressed, and we try to deal with that as well.
Kate? Thanks, Bob.
Well, that book is the result of somewhat manic anxiety on my part, and I had a team of people working with me in my office, and it was probably 15 trips to Louisiana, long trips, and then also local partnerships, lots of interviewing and on-the-ground research. And I think, that the landscape in Bob's projects are really important as a sort of very personal way of kind of imagining time and I think helping with the healing process, and in the sense, landscape in that, in the sense of the Petrochemical America project was a way of thinking synthetically and trying to integrate lots of different aspects that we had found in the environment, whether it was about health or food or ecology, and try to wrap them all together. So that's what the book was trying to do. It's a lot of work.
Hilary?
I think Vista isn't really a word we were working with in our project, so it's interesting that you would read that through the renderings, but I think the idea that streets that are really not being used or utilized are prime for a kind of rethinking in the development. And I know there's something happening just recently in Chicago about reusing streets that are abandoned, so it seems like the idea that the projects are only 4 stories tall and very narrow, working with certain new sort of building materials to minimize the kind of width and make it very economical could be a kind of segment, could be built as a test. So I do think it's a possibility, whether it's in Orange or somewhere else. I don't know.
Yes, fabulous idea about the design competition. We actually have had this discussion a number of times. For resource reasons, we haven't been able to get it off the ground yet, but we've been talking about it both for kind of new designs, but also for existing buildings. Such a huge amount of our building stock already exists, and it's going to be around for many, many years. And so, what we're starting to try and get into now is how do we look at transforming existing spaces, stairwells, buildings. When you can't design that from the beginning, how do you kind of transform things? So we've discussed this idea of an active design transformation challenge that we'd love to kind of get off the ground at some point when we've got a bit more resources to do it. But thanks for the idea as well.
Maybe last question. We can have more questions outside.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll just quickly answer, yes. The slides, if you want to go to nyc.gov/ADG, There are slides for a series of webinars that have also been done on the active design guidelines, and that's available currently in addition to the guidelines. And the CDC maps, obesity maps for the US are available on the cdc.gov site. Okay. And we have one more question, and I think we should wrap it up after that. But the panelists, some of us will still be around if you want to, if you have any.
Maybe this is a question, maybe it's an appreciation, I'm not sure. It's been a very interesting couple of days as an alum here, hearing things, and a number of suggestions and things that I've heard that sort of have stuck with me and puzzled me. Was a statement last night that maybe with the computer, the visualization, that the virtual world has become more important than the actual world in what we're doing now. A statement this morning that if you want to be in nature, don't live in it. What I think was really interesting about this panel is the extent to which on the topic, through the topic of health, you're dealing both with urbanization and with the notion of nature and the role of nature, even in the most urbanized places, and nature as you think of it typically, but also how it's still part of our nature as humans, as healthy organisms. And I really appreciate, and it's complex, and it's difficult, and it's elusive, and I really appreciate the way you folks are wrestling with it, and any other thoughts you might have on that sort of general topic.
I'd just like to say one thing. That I was really impressed with that story of Cancer Alley, and sort of getting an idea of what a norm is in one part of our country versus another. I mean, spending most of my life in the Pacific Northwest, there's this great reverence for the natural environment. And there's one norm there. And then, you know, the stories that we heard about in Louisiana, there is another norm. And so it's not surprising in this sort of political time that we're in that we are such a divided country in so many different ways. And to try to find a way to bring these things together in a very, very positive way, I think is a profound task that I am not sure even how this young generation is going to deal with it, but it's really what it's all about.
Yeah. And I'll just add to that in the glossary, we had this glossary word called Living Closer, which is about it's not about density, it's actually maybe something that could address sort of mental health aspects, but the notion of clustering development and mixed-use development, not this notion of deprivation of cars from the car or deprivation from products, but we can imagine a kind of set of communities like, you know, what Hilary's describing, that could be people living more closely together that would actually have a real ricochet effect on so many things that we've talked about today. So I feel like that's a real generational charge, is how to reshape, you know, think about settlement patterns in many of these ways to be able to actually bring people closer together politically and physically, been connecting places where people work and shop and live.
Hilary or Sky, any closing words? Okay. Well, I want to thank our panel today. And again, thank you, Stephen, for helping to organize this. And thank you to the audience for being here to 6 p.m. and after 6 p.m. on a Saturday evening. So, yeah, and I think we'll close by saying that, you know, I think one of the things that I was struck with this panel was just the interconnection, I think, of some of the challenges that we face. And so, you know, I think talking about the theme of today's panel and today's workshop and conference, the whole idea of innovation and collaboration seems to me, because of the interconnectedness of all of these many and myriad of issues, that it takes also an interconnected way of solving these problems in order to find the innovative solutions. And so collaboration is a key part, I think, of the innovations that we're gonna need to find solutions to these problems. So with that, I think I'm going to close and thank everyone for being here today.
Good afternoon. We're going to start this session entitled Learn, Education, and Economic Development. And I imagine there will be a number of individuals who will be straggling in from lunch, which is okay, even if they don't have a clue about what this session is all about by the time they get here. But let us begin because we are running a bit late. It's a pleasure for me, Jonathan Cole, to be the person who's supposed to oversee this panel and to make some introductory contextual remarks related to education and economic development and the future of higher education in the United States. It's a pleasure to do both of those things. But I wanted to first, sort of with housekeeping details, introduce you to the exceptional people who will be part of the panel this afternoon. They will be delivering talks, I think, in pairs, as far as I can tell. And each group, that is, each pair will take roughly 15 minutes to present. I will also take 10 to 15 minutes to present initially my historical and contextual remarks, as well as a few looking forward. And then hopefully we'll have an opportunity to have questions from the audience that members of the panel can respond to. I'm delighted to welcome to Columbia, and in some cases back to Columbia, members of the panel. Let me give you a little bit of their background, and I won't bother as we move from one part of the session to another to reintroduce them. The first is Tracy Mazel, or maybe Mazel, I'm not sure how you pronounce it. She's the Assistant Vice President in the Strategic Planning Group of the Center for Economic Transformation of New York City Economic Development Corporation. She's responsible for leading projects, including applied sciences in New York City, related to different economic development challenges in the city. She's also involved with conducting research and analysis and making recommendations for building consensus. That's a nice word which is rarely can be used in New York. We also have Claire Newman, who will be, as it were, partnering with Tracy this afternoon. She's the Vice President in Real Estate Division of the New York City Economic Development Corporation. She executes public-private real estate development projects, such as the restoration of the Lowe's Kings Theater in Flatbush, Brooklyn, and Applied Sciences Tech Campus initiative, which we will hear more about. And then the second pair will be from SOM, Skidmore, Owens, and Merrill. Roger Duffy is the design partner in the New York office of SOM. Among Roger's key initiatives are the creation of the Campus Design Studio, SOM Education Lab, and the launching of SOM Journal, an annually published book of SOM's best work, as selected and critiqued by an independent jury of artists, designers, and critics. He will be joined by Colin Koop, who's the senior designer in Skidmore, Owens, and Merrill in the New York office. His current work includes the master plan for the Cornell NYC campus on Roosevelt Avenue that we've heard much about in the last few months. And other university work in New York City includes the new 354,000 square feet of University Center for the new school, to a major renovation and relocation of the Fogelman Library, which is also at the new school. I could go on and on with him, but then we would never finish. They have many, many other credits, awards, publications, etc. But these are some of their accomplishments and current situations. So let me pause and try to give you a sense about the past and the future challenges of American higher learning. As of this year, the United States has by far, I think, the greatest system of higher education in the world. By most reckonings, we have roughly 80% of the top 20 universities, 70% of the top 50 and 60% or so of the top 100. There are many indicators of this leadership. I could go into it in detail, whether they be Nobel Prize awards, whether they be the scientific literature and that which has had the greatest impact on the fields. In short, we are, our universities, the envy of the world, and because many of the very brightest and most able young people want to attend them and to work at them as faculty members, researchers, and as students, they represent collectively perhaps the only American industry at the moment which has a favorable balance of trade. Now, in the land of higher learning, we are then, as it were, the kings or queens of the mountain. Most nations not only envy us, but also are looking to imitate our great universities. Given our position, you might think that our universities ought to stand pat and keep doing what we've been doing very well over the last 75 years, at least until challenged by some aspiring kings and queens. Yet we face an interesting paradox. We are all that I've suggested above, yet we have a sense of the system that is, of higher learning that is deeply challenged and troubled, if not in crisis, a word that I think is too often used in books and in the discussions of our universities. I mean, we are troubled in many ways, but I don't think that the system is in a state of crisis. But if we're so good, why do we feel so bad? Why is there a growing belief that our system of higher learning is at risk and may be incapable in the future of fulfilling its part of its compact with the nation to provide avenues of upward social mobility, a better stock of human capital, a labor force capable of handling the most technologically sophisticated jobs, discoveries that will cure diseases and create new industries, and produce a better informed citizenry capable of actually participating more fully in the public debates and discussions of important national issues. In my recent book, this rather weighty tome of roughly 600 pages, which I recommend to you highly, and I only give a quiz after five years of reading. I try to do basically three things. It's called The Great American University, its rise to preeminence, its indispensable national role, why it must be protected. Now there's a mouthful. And it's really divided into three parts. How did the American university in the 20th century become preeminent? How do we become the best in the world? What were the value systems that were the underpinnings of the universities? What structures were built on top of those value systems? How do we benefit enormously, strangely enough, from the war, Second World War in Europe with the greatest intellectual migration that probably in the history of the world? How did we use these scientists and scholars and artists and writers to improve the university? How did they perform in a way that provided leadership of a burgeoning set of universities with extraordinary young people, but which lacked leadership? Now, I should say that there are, and I don't want to go into that book because I'm convinced that if you want to read it, you'll find out all that I could possibly tell you this morning. And I'm much more interested in looking at the future, as it were, in my next book, about what I think a great university ought to look like, not what it would necessarily look like, but what it ought to look like 40 years from now. So around the mid-century or 2040, what would a great university look like? This, by the way, is a debate which existed in the 1910s to the 1920s. Extraordinary people were engaged in that debate, people like Hutchins and many of the leaders of higher education, Conant and others. But by the end of the 1930s and early 1940s, that debate was settled, and we more or less settled into a structure and form that we have continued with until the present day. And there's been very little questioning of what that structure ought to be, or whether or not there ought to be any changes in that structure. Now, I argue in this book, and then I'll be done with it for this afternoon at least, that what makes American universities the greatest in the world is not their undergraduate education, as important as that may be, and in fact is, Undergraduate education, which I might say I think is done very well at certain places, including colleges and some universities, and done abysmally poorly at many, many other universities. This is all on top of the structure of K through 12 education, which is done almost uniformly abysmally in this country. So it's strange that we have such great universities and such poor K through 12 systems of education. But what has made these universities great, and which most people, educated people, do not know, are the discoveries that have come out of these universities. And the second part of the book is really about that. There are very few people who recognize that the laser, for example, was co-invented or co-discovered, I really should say, between Bell Labs, Columbia, and Stanford. And when it was discovered, it was thought of as a fundamental piece of knowledge that was developed in search of applications. Well, they certainly have managed to find applications for the laser over the last 50 years. Few people know that the FM radio, magnetic resonance imaging, global positioning systems, barcodes, the algorithm for Google, the fetal monitor, the pap smear, cures for childhood leukemia, the discovery of the insulin gene, the nicotine patch, antibiotics, the Richter scale, all these came out of universities. I could go on and on and on of great discoveries, and even some of the more mundane things that we are aware of came from universities, including Gatorade, as you probably know. The electric toothbrush is another. The Heimlich maneuver came out of the laboratory halls of Cornell. And even Viagra had its origins in these great universities. And so when we think about the strains which are there, I'm not going to, again, talk about what produced all of this. We tend to think, well, what are the challenges? And then we think about foreign challenges. We think about China, we think about India, we think about other nations of the world, Latin America, et cetera. I don't worry a bit, really, about those foreign challenges. The hallmark of the 20th century American university in many ways has been its use of competition to get better and better and better. And competition from abroad would actually be a good thing for American higher education, I'm convinced. It would lead to the more rapid growth of knowledge, the curing of diseases that might not be cured otherwise. And in fact, while we might not have such a high percentage of the top 100, we would be doing more good work, and it would be pushing us to do even better work. So I don't really believe that if China can get its act together and India can get its act together, and that will take 20 to 25 years, I believe, that we have to be seriously concerned about them taking over the world of higher education and leaving us behind. So if it's not the external forces, then what is it that really represent the challenges? Well, I like to think of the cartoon figure Pogo. Some of you may be familiar with. You'd have to be of a certain age to be familiar with Pogo and Walt Kelly's character. But Pogo once said, he said, "I've seen the enemy," I'm paraphrasing, "and he is us." So I think that the enemy for American universities is really internal to the system itself. It's the repression which could take place from government on these universities. It's the cutback of resources like we're seeing throughout the state university system, which is literally strangling the great universities, and of places like Berkeley and UCLA and San Diego, as well as Arizona, Michigan, Wisconsin, and I could go on and on and on. In fact, California now spends considerably more on its prisons than it does on higher education, and that trend seems to be continuing. Okay, so what are some of the challenges which I think we will face and will have to come to grips with in the coming years? First of all, I want to suggest to you that we should not shy away from the economic impact of these universities. And part of what the discussion today is going to be at this panel is what the economic impact can be for New York, as well as what it has been perhaps nationally. And let me just give you 3 examples of that. Stanford University is one of those that publishes the economic impact of it. You've probably, some of you, seen the article in the New Yorker this past week that talks a little bit about this, but they actually publish a report every year. And in 2008, they, with companies, 2,400 companies that were formed by Stanford alums, Stanford students, and members of the faculty, generated $255 billion of total revenue among just the Silicon Valley 150. A lot of that money, by the way, goes back to Stanford in the form of gifts and various things, but it really has been essential that you have Google systems, Google, Cisco systems, Hewlett-Packard, and others as part of the economy of California. MIT, similarly, in 2008, produced $222 billion worth of revenue and world sales by the people who formed their companies that came out of MIT. And we're not even counting the effects, the multiplier effect of for every job within those particular industries, there's 1 to 5 jobs that are created in service industries and others that service these new industries. Now, you might say that this is all sort of crass, practical thinking, and to some extent it is, but the universities of the world are going to be much more linked to industry than they have been in the past. They are going to be involved in what has been called and dubbed Pasteur's quadrant by Donald Stokes, which means they're going to be doing research which is both fundamental, involving, as Pasteur did, his interest in fundamental diseases and trying to understand fundamental diseases, as well as his interest in trying to actually cure through the development of vaccines and others, various kinds of diseases. Well, there is a shift in the United States towards work in the Pasteur's quadrant away from what had heretofore been the main way in which research was being done, which is first let's generate a stockpile of the most basic fundamental knowledge, and then downstream it will have practical implications, whatever that may be. There's a much more focused way of looking at it now. So let me raise a bunch of questions that I think will be attended to in the next book that I'm writing, but I think that we should be thinking about as we look to the future and not rest upon our laurels. First, what will be, what will the new academic man and woman look like in the year 2030 or 2040? Can we produce profiles of the great teachers and great researchers and what they ought to look like at that time? I would suggest to you that the nature of the relationship between teaching and teachers and students will become inverted in that period of time. Lectures will be heard and listened to at home on your iPad, your iPod, or whatever it might be, and what will take place in the university campus will be problem solving, which will involve the teachers actually helping out with problem solving. This is already taking place on American campuses, and it will be, I think, become almost paradigmatic in the future. How will the cost structure of higher education be dealt with? Because it's not unclear whether or not universities, including some fairly wealthy universities, will be able to survive with tuition growing at the rate that it is, and with the capability of actually reaching scores and scores, in fact, millions of people through the technology that is growing, and that we can't even imagine what it will look like 30 or 40 years from now. There is a course, as you may know, on artificial intelligence that's being given at Stanford by a fellow who also works at Google, works on the driverless car. Have you heard about that? It's driven 100,000 miles without an accident, by the way. And he also is working on artificial intelligence, and he has given a course recently to roughly 200,000 students in 140 countries around the world. And there are now downloadable lectures from Harvard in law and issues of justice and others that can be looked at by anyone. Now, they can get this, but why do they have to pay for it? And should they have to pay for it? And in what form would they have to pay for it? And what does it do to the nature of the universities and the nature of campus life? in short, how can we facilitate the democratization of knowledge and its delivery worldwide without undermining our own future? How will undergraduate teaching be transformed? Ought we to create seamless webs between K through 12 education and advanced learning and research? And how might that be done? And how might the government become involved in doing that? How can we rethink the entire admissions policies of these universities, like Harvard, Columbia, Yale? My own belief is that we are focusing in on one form of intelligence when we now know that there are multiple forms of intelligence, and it is impossible for a person like Allen Ginsberg to actually get into Columbia today, because he probably got a C in physics in his sophomore year at Brooklyn Tech or something, and you might as well forget about it, says his college advisor. There's no way in which you're going to get into the Ivy League. We've taken the quirkiness out of the classes, and we've taken also away from the university a lot of the interaction of different forms of intelligence that we know from experimental evidence actually are better at problem solving than if you have the same kind of intelligence operating. Let me just say two more things, because I've run out of my time, and all I'm doing is, staying with the tradition of the architecture school is never to finish on time, and say a couple of things. If competition was one of the key elements in the growth of American universities and their greatness, and believe me, there was a huge competition from the very beginning. Harper, when he got his money from Rockefeller to start the University of Chicago, immediately went out to try to recruit Harvard faculty, faculty from Hopkins, faculty from Columbia. He was fantastic at doing it, but what he really did was he destroyed Clark University, where Freud gave his first lectures in America, by taking something like 16 members of its faculty and pulling them off to Chicago. And that is when we see the beginning of free agency, basically. It's not sports free agency, but academic free agency, and we all know about it. There are superstars that are commanding enormous prices, as it were. And that is going to happen with great teachers as well. They're going to be the superstar teachers in the next 30 years who are going to command that kind of rewards as well. But if we're going to survive as universities, don't we have to begin to think about cooperative structures? And one of the things about the project that we're going to hear more about today, the collaboration between Technicon and Cornell, is a collaborative effort. We've collaborated well on libraries, but we've collaborated well on almost nothing else. And yet, you can imagine that de facto mergers of various departments, units, programs, such as sustainability programs, could enhance the quality of those programs without adding any faculty members at any particular point in time, and reduce the cost of those programs substantially. So is it going to be necessary, as I will argue in my new book, that we must begin to think about and create academic leagues rather than sports leagues? And the academic leagues and the contours of those academic leagues are going to vary greatly in design, but we have to begin to think about them. And then, finally, my last comment, since it ends with architecture, and since I was really very fortunate to do a studio in this school this last semester on reimagining the university with the architect Laurie Hawkinson, who is terrific, there is the issue of the physicality, the physical structures of these universities, and how we depart from what is become almost an axiom in higher education. You have Rome's domes, you have Oxbridge's quadrangles, you have Harvard and Yale's colleges and house systems, you have the McKim campus as fortress, keep the people in but the neighborhood out. You have these various horizontal structures, but you are increasingly getting urbanization, huge populations in urban settings. 800 universities are being built in China today, many of them, or most of them, in very, very densely populated areas. Can we break through the axiom, the idea that you cannot have campuses that are built vertically. The highest building in American academics today, I don't know how many of you know which one it is, but it's the Cathedral of Learning at the University of Pittsburgh. It was built in the Depression, and it's 38 stories high. We have 17 acres in New York, a quintessentially vertical city, and we're not going to build a building that's higher than 13 or 14 stories. Why not build a 40 or 50-story research building? And the question is, how do you build such structures and still maintain a sense of community? And I believe that we're going to have to rethink the way the campus is organized for undergraduates, for research, the integration of these pieces, and where we are in quintessentially vertical cities, we're going to have to reimagine the way in which we actually construct and think about how we build buildings that will represent the growth of knowledge rather than the other way around. We are no longer going to look at buildings which have the word mathematics on it, philosophy on it, or chemistry on it. The multidisciplinarity of higher education as it's moving into the future is going to call for different kinds of structures which make and facilitate interaction, and it is going to often have to be created on a vertical scale or a mixed model of horizontal and vertical buildings. Well, those are some of the thoughts that I wanted to put out on the table. We'll now hear from the panelists who will talk about various aspects of education and economic development. And let me turn the podium over to Tracy and Claire for their initial set of comments. And hopefully, if I haven't taken up too much time, we'll have an opportunity at the end to ask questions of any of us, and we'll hopefully be able to enter into an interesting conversation. So, thank you.
Thank you for having us all here today. This is an exciting day. It sounds like a great conference. So I'm here to give you guys an overview of the genesis of the Applied Sciences NYC project and why the city of New York actually really drove this from concept to fruition, and how we see this as being really necessary for the continued economic and business growth in New York City. So over the centuries, New York City has continuously reinvented itself and its economy, depending on what's happening in the local, national, and international economies. So if you look at New York City in the late 1800s, we were actually a trading port and a center of commerce. In the mid-1900s, our strength was in manufacturing and a powerhouse for light industry, which today, the manufacturing continues to decline, and there's only specific niches that have increased or maintained. And today we're really known as a city of services, as we all know, in architecture or professional finance and media. And this isn't just a local issue about thinking about where we're going next. Really, President Obama even brought this up in his State of the Union in 2011 when he was talking about research and technology and how that's really the next place where the United States economy needs to continue to grow. So when we think about New York City itself, we're actually at another inflection point today. In 1969, New York City had a historical high of 3.3 million private sector jobs. Today, New York City is home to hundreds of thousands of more people, and we're expected to add another million people over the next 20 years to the New York City population. And yet, we still have not broken the historical job ceiling in private sector jobs. So in order to sustain our growing population, we need to continue to attract more knowledge-intensive jobs in the future. And we're going to need to consider the infrastructure that will allow for the growing population, as well as for the growth of these new industries. And then just to put this in a little bit more of an international perspective, if you look at the New York City economy relative to what we consider as some of the major powerhouse economies, so I'm not even looking at the United States versus these countries, but just New York City, the 5 boroughs, if you looked at us in 1975, our GDP was actually greater than that of South Korea, India, and China. which is frankly, I find that shocking. But then as you look today, obviously things have changed and the economies have changed and types of industries. So we as a city can no longer rely on US global dominance. We actually need to think about how we as a city are going to grow our own economy, as well as just thinking about how the composition of GDP has changed over time. In 1972, our GDP was 63% services, whereas in today it's about 79%. So academic and business leaders agree, and we've heard resoundingly, that in order to supercharge a 21st century economy and create jobs for the future, innovation is driving, innovation by technology is key. A report by the US Department of Commerce stated that tech jobs were expected to grow by 17% between 2008 and 2018 versus 10% in other sectors. So it's no longer about adding just another person to the assembly line. It's really about how do we find those innovations that are going to change the way that business is done. And innovation and technology are strongly linked with academic scientific research, and particularly in applied sciences, which is that intersection of commercial technology and academic research. So in New York City, the good news is that we're quickly emerging as a major center of technology and innovation. And we're in a position of strength as a center of technology. So if we look at VC, venture capital tech investment over the last year or 2.5 years, the number of deals per quarter has increased by 40% since the fourth quarter of 2009, surpassing Massachusetts by $714 million in investments in the last year. So there's stability in the investment community. There's a lot of excitement about what's happening in the tech center as a tech center in New York City. And it's only continuing to grow. And then when we think about basic research in New York City, if we look at patents that have been assigned to inventors over the last 30 years, we actually have continued to grow, and actually New York City patents have increased by more than 50% over the last decade. So it's not just about the next new hot app, it's really about things that are being made here. The other good thing for New York City is that we're home to many of the world-class universities. We have 100+ academic institutions in the 5 boroughs, 9 academic medical centers, 20,000 university and commercial researchers, and we're America's largest university and college town, with 626,000 students. Not to mention that there's significant resources and partners regionally. So I've said all the good things about New York City. And where we are today. But we still, and while we have a lot in terms of tech and education, based on the size of the New York City economy, there's significant room for growth in applied sciences. So when you look at us relative to our peer areas, so the Boston and San Francisco Bay areas are usually considered as the New York City competitors. Frankly, we rank 33rd in the nation for the percent of workforce in science and engineering. And the percent of payroll that accounts for high-tech jobs in New York City is less than half of that in Silicon Valley and Boston. So there's significant room for growth and for driving, and we really wanted to answer the question of how do we develop that part of the economy for New York City, because that's where we're seeing more and more growth coming from across the country. So we actually launched a series of roundtables called Game Changers. This started out of, Mayor Bloomberg joined New York City, and he really had a drive to diversify the economy away from financial services. He wanted to make sure that we weren't a one-industry town, because you never know, the next financial meltdown might happen, and then it did. In September 2008, we actually redoubled our efforts to really think about what other industries are strengths for New York City and how do we help grow them. So we held a series of roundtables and workshops and looked at the growth sectors in the city and the country. We talked with over 350 business leaders, community leaders, and university leaders, both within the city, nationally and internationally. We resoundingly heard that building technical capacity and growing academic research and applied sciences will be critical to growing New York City's economy. In a recent survey that we held among tech startups and VCs, 93% of respondents told us that recruitment of talent, particularly engineers, was critical to growth and really difficult to do in New York today. And then the last piece of this is that when they talk about applied science research talent, they're really talking about graduate and PhD-led research. And that's where we focused our efforts around applied sciences. I'm going to now hand it over to my colleague Claire, who will talk us about the process for applied sciences.
Thanks, Tracy. Good afternoon, everyone. I also just want to reiterate thanks for being here, and this is certainly an exciting panel to participate in. So I'm going to run through how we went about effectuating this project and then give a brief introduction to the actual Cornell project itself. So, having heard all of this feedback pointing in what was essentially one direction, the city determined that the best way to increase its strength in the tech sector was to try to significantly expand our graduate level STEM, which is science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, educational programs. We have some great universities here, obviously, but we could get even bigger, as our research had indicated. And so we approached this by releasing an RFEI to kind of gauge the interest of universities around the country and around the world in building an expansion campus here or significantly expanding a school that already was here. In response to our RFEI, we received what was truly an overwhelming response. I remember that we just kept getting package after package, and all told, we ended up getting 18 responses, which represented 27 universities, local, national, and international, and all of incredibly high caliber, is exactly the type of universities we were hoping to get interested in building new graduate facilities here in New York. And what we did is we entered into a process to review these, and what we were focused on was really figuring out what exactly were universities interested in building here, where did they see the kind of programs that they thought would make sense to expand in New York, and most importantly, what could the city do to help them create this development. Obviously, this wasn't happening naturally, so there must be some kind of barriers to entry or some significant hurdles that need to be overcome, and the city could help with that. So what we decided to do is offer essentially three things, and the first was a soft package of publicity, help with different approval processes. Apparently, it's hard to build a building in New York, and other kind of soft contributions. Second, and I think we all know this, that one of the greatest barriers to entry in New York is the price of land. It's extremely expensive here, and moreover, if you're a university and you're looking for a large site to build a campus, it becomes even that much more challenging. There just aren't any greenfield development sites here. So we combed through the city's portfolio of real estate assets and essentially identified a few sites that we thought might be attractive to universities, which you can see here, one on Governor's Island, one on Roosevelt Island, and one at the Brooklyn Navy Yard, which were essentially vacant areas that we could offer. And then lastly, we offered cash, up to $100 million to help defray the cost of construction, which for particularly a technology type focused use could run a university more than $1,000 per square foot to build. In the summer of 2011, having learned all this that we did in the RFEI process, we released an RFP to which we received 7 responses, and we got a broad range of ideas from, again, a number of different institutions. We had ideas about doing technology that focused on enhancing the city's movie and television production services. We had schools who were interested in focusing on solutions to urbanization and infrastructure issues. And what better kind of testing ground than New York to do that, and then broader kind of ideas about graduate services that would have synergy with New York sectors. It kind of made us want to do all the projects, but obviously that wasn't totally possible. So we focused in on our selection process and read through the thousands of pages we received in response to the RFP. And what we were really focused on, we had a ton of selection criteria, but to highlight a few, we're really looking for something that's going to have a big impact. So this, more than any other of our solicitations, was a case where more truly was more. We wanted somebody who was willing to build big, who was going to bring a lot of faculty and students here, and we were truly looking for magnitude of impact. We were also looking for projects that were going to pay really careful attention to something we talked about in the RFP, which is how do you keep the jobs and employees that are going to be generated by this intellectual property that's being created here in the city? The last thing you want is to make this huge investment and then have all the graduates run off to Boston or Silicon Valley, or companies be created and seek cheaper places to do business. And so we asked universities to tell us about their track record in retaining businesses in the area, and also about ideas that they had about how they could make that happen here in New York. And of course, we also looked at the types of sciences proposed. We asked schools to explain why the area of focus made sense in New York, either because that sector was growing here or there was a clear synergy. And to help us and our partners, we convened this panel of experts who really asked key questions of the universities and helped us look at their strengths and weaknesses. Ultimately, of course, as everybody knows, we ended up signing a contract with Cornell University in December of last year. And I have to say that Cornell really, above and beyond anyone else, was incredibly responsive to our concerns about keeping that job creation here in New York. And we'll talk about some of the things they're going to do on that in a moment. To give a brief overview, and Colin and Roger will discuss this in greater depth, they're going to be building an approximately 2 million square foot campus on Roosevelt Island. Groundbreaking is expected for 2015, and they're going to open up in 2017. When it's open and fully built out, there's going to be literally thousands of graduate students there, and we expect that this Cornell project is going to nearly double the number of engineering grad students here in New York. So that's going to be significantly additive to New York's economy. They're also proposing what we think is a very unique arrangement, and it gets back to something that Jonathan talked about earlier, which is they're literally going to have private sector R&D companies co-located on the university campus. So there's going to be buildings where both there are Cornell students and there are private sector companies, and they're sharing research ideas, there's internships, and there's these kind of communal spaces for bouncing ideas back and forth, which we think will help, and they think will help create more kind of applied technology innovations. They're also proposing to have incubators and accelerators right on campus, so these fledgling companies will have inexpensive spaces with Cornell resources right there to grow and thrive. You know, a word on the two partners here. The project is going to bring together two schools that aren't just at the top in terms of the sciences, but are also world-class in business creation. Cornell's alumni in the last 5 years have created over 2,600 companies, employing some 34,000 people. And Technion literally sits in the middle of a business campus that has 4,000 businesses. And, you know, this is such a place of innovation that it's attracted companies like Google and Yahoo and Apple to go and open facilities there, which would also be a great outcome for New York, of course. They're actually hoping to start the program in fall of this year in temporary space, and they'll be ramping up, you know, over the next basically 20, 30 years. The school is going to be organized around 3 fields of study. And so instead of having traditional departments, the Cornell and Technion are thinking of having these hubs, which at least initially will be focused on connective media, healthier life, and the built environment. And that's going to allow people from the different engineering disciplines you see listed there to all be working together on similar problems as opposed to being divided up into different silos. Some of the other benefits and ideas that Cornell brought to the table, one thing New York is really excited about, Cornell is going to establish a $150 million revolving loan fund for startup businesses that agree to stay in the city for a certain amount of time. So that's the kind of incentive to keep folks here that we were talking about. And they're also partnering with Department of Education to help at the K through 12 level, especially in the fields of science. In terms of direct impacts, we've got some fun numbers here for you. This is just the university itself, literally employing thousands of people. And as you can see, it's not just jobs for professors. There are other jobs that the campus will be creating. And in terms of indirect impacts, the numbers are even bigger. So when you start looking at expectations around how many spin-off companies and jobs are going to be created, the effect on the city's tax base and job basis is really staggering. Obviously, not all of these jobs are going to end up on Roosevelt Island. So, you know, we see this going to adjacent neighborhoods like Long Island City and Greenpoint, and also branching out along the F line, since that's what goes to Roosevelt Island. So that's kind of a summary of the process itself, and I'll turn it over to Roger and Colin.
Hi, I'm Colin Coop, and I think with the time that we have, I'm going to speak for Roger and myself about the work that we've done leading the design effort of Cornell University's tech campus here in the city. Claire talked very much about the process, which was very interesting. There was a RFEI, an expression of interest first, followed by an RFP. And I think it's interesting to talk as a design professional about the different roles that you play over the course of that process. So we were with Cornell from the first moment and worked very hard with them to, even in the expression of interest period, help them understand what the city was offering and what the potential of that was from a design standpoint. So there were sites, there were actually even more sites than the ones that were finalized for the RFP. We worked very hard to sort of show the potential of each of those and honed in very quickly on Roosevelt Island as the most ideal for what Cornell envisioned their campus and their pedagogy to be. And then once we went into the design period for the competition phase, it was very much like any other design period. So the requirements were for plans and sections and images and phasing and construction staging and any number of things that had to be thought through very quickly. So it was very much a sprint, and it was exciting for us. It was exciting for us to work with a client that was so committed to thinking new about the way that universities think about their physical assets. And so before I go into the actual design work, I'll talk a little bit more in detail about Cornell's actual pedagogy. So you've heard a little bit already from Claire, and how do those two work together? How do Cornell and Technion work together? So Cornell is going to own the buildings, construct the campus, and then the two of them together are going to staff it with faculty. So it is very much a sort of a Cornell centric place in terms of ownership, but in terms of the pedagogy, the two schools together are very much going to be in a cooperative relationship. And they both bring strengths. So Technion very much has a longer track record of working directly with industry, whereas Cornell obviously has the history of being a top flight research institution. And each of them get something, I think, interesting out of this. I think Technion gets an opportunity to expand their connections, particularly to the US and to New York City, where I think a huge percentage of their alumni currently reside. And Cornell gets an opportunity to have up in Ithaca the sort of ivory tower that many universities are, but then have an opportunity to have a very intertwined, interconnected engineering, applied sciences campus here in the city. So they were very much about trying to straddle the line between those two different methodologies of learning and teaching. It will be mostly postgraduates and PhDs, other pieces like that. No undergraduates at all. Everyone will be connected to industry. And the curriculum is going to emphasize individual study and individual interest. So the idea that unconventional classes would be tied very much to entrepreneurial ideas is something that's going to be at the core of the curriculum. The hubs, the idea of the hubs is one of sort of a sink or swim attitude. So most universities are organized by department. You've got the architecture department, the engineering department. Cornell wants hubs, and the reason they want hubs is because these are either going to succeed and grow and be more successful, or they're going to die and be replaced by something else. So the first three that have been described are the Connective Media Hub, the Healthier Life Hub, and the Built Environment Hub. And each of those has an emphasis, and each of those has specific industries and specific departments that contribute to them, but they are not a department unto itself. So there will be engineering students in all three of these hubs. There will be, but there will also be healthcare health and sciences students contributing to Healthier Life. There will be architecture contributing to the built environment. So these three, if they grow and they succeed, they'll continue to develop, and they might be 3 or 4 hubs that join over the course of the years. Or it may be that 2 of the 3 fail but are replaced. So it's very much an idea that they want to be nimble with these hubs and not be sort of stuck to the idea of creating a singular department that then has to exist here. And then that relationship, it really is about job creation, and specifically in the New York City tech ecosystem. So everything they have to do has to be about a relationship to the surrounding city. And from a designer standpoint, that's one of the reasons why we emphasize to them Roosevelt Island being the best of the options available, because it is on the subway, because it is a tram stop away from the center of Midtown, because on one side you have Long Island City and Queens, and on the other side you have Manhattan. It's much more tied in and connected than Governor's Island, certainly, and even Brooklyn Navy Yards. So it was, for us, the obvious choice. The phasing is incremental, and it'll be in 2017, a preferred growth of 700,000, all the way up to roughly 2 million. So they need to move quickly. The design is progressing extremely fast, and all of this is pointing towards the idea of opening in 2017. So I'll give you a flavor of some of the research and that our practice that Roger runs is focused on in terms of education and how those helped inform the design of these. And I'm going to put these in sort of two camps. On the one hand, we have buildings which are very much about innovation and buildings which are about sustainability, because another key component for this for Cornell was to take some of their sustainability goals that they've established for their Ithaca campus and see how many of those can they shift forward decades. So what are they planning on doing in 2037, and what can they do in 2017 here? Well, how can they collapse the timeline? And I think some of the projects that we've been developing helped us as designers very much lead a direction towards a specific kind of solution, architectural solution. So let's talk about innovation first. There are a number of notable, even masterwork buildings which are dedicated to research, and this is but a small flavor of some of them. But the question would be, how many of these inside of their walls did the great research actually happen? Did the great leaps forward actually happen? And how many of these were the actual sort of trophy pieces for the innovation? So Salk Institute is a compelling architectural piece that functions and is a gorgeous building, but in a lot of ways, the fundamental research that allowed the Salk Institute to build that building had already taken place. What we are interested in are the kinds of buildings, and these are just two good examples, that actually did spawn the growth, and what can you actually learn from these buildings. And one was a mere happenstance, which was Building 20, and it just happened to be that that building was ideal for innovation. The other one was Bell Labs, specifically the Murray Hill building, which was designed very specifically by the engineers that worked there to be an incubator for innovation. So it's not much to look at. Neither of these buildings are much to look at, and I think that's important to think about, is that these are buildings which were nimble and flexible before that was a value that was important to us. Bell Labs was a very interesting mix of labs, offices, lounge space, cafeteria. It was a hive of energy, and it did serve a larger community in a way that many of the buildings in that era did not. It also was infamous for the corridor that was so long through the length of the building that you could stand at one end and visually it would disappear to a vanishing point at the other. That was important, though, to them, because for them, what was important was interaction between people. So they had these incredibly long corridors. They did not allow people's offices to be in the same space as their labs. You actually had to walk long corridors to get from point A to point B. And they had a quote or an idea that it was about interaction. So a scientist walking down the hallway would be picking up ideas like a magnet picks up iron filings. They had this notion that physical prominence, forced interaction, was more important than siloed space where people would sit and sort of never emerge for hours at a time. The building itself, its infrastructure, was also set up in a very interesting way. The entire building was set up on a 6x6 foot grid, and that grid was set up in such a way where they could deliver all of these services to every one of those 6 foot blocks. So what it meant is you could take down a wall on a Friday and put a wall up on a Monday, so you went from a 12 foot wide lab to an 18 foot wide lab. So the building did not get in the way of the research that was going on. So those kind of infrastructural moves are extremely important in sort of designing these buildings for maximum flexibility. The other one was that I'll talk about is Building 20 at MIT, which was torn down just recently. But it was one of the things that obviously made it great was it was actually the place they put all their misfits. So if you didn't fit into a specific discipline like engineering, you got tossed in there. So Noam Chomsky got tossed in there, and he did all his linguistics research. You had people doing sort of strange studies, like trying to create the first atomic clock, and they got stuffed in there. And the advantage to them was that the building was not precious to them by any standard. So you look at that stairwell there, and it tells you something about what the building was like to be in. But for the researchers, what it meant was that if you were creating the first atomic clock, you could cut a hole in the ceiling and connect 2 floors together, because your atomic clock needed to be 2 stories tall, and nobody really cared particularly. But there's an architectural principle there, which I think is pretty fundamental. It also had these enormous floor plates. It was extremely sort of convoluted in its organization, but that also meant that people talked about the fact that they had to walk by each other to get to places. There was an engineer who had to walk by another, and they ended up talking. One was working on computer programming, and they invented the first video game. So there's very interesting ways in which the building facilitated the kind of growth. And a lot of people were not happy about the fact that that building disappeared when it left, because it was such a good innovation. So that's innovation. There's a lot more to talk about there, which informed our work. The other piece is sustainability, and the one that I'll reference is that we were very interested in pushing see how much they would be willing to push the limits. So the one thing I think more than anything that we honed in on was the idea that there could be a net zero building as a part of this campus. We have a building right now that's just about to be constructed here in the city, which is PS62, which will be the first net zero building in New York City and the first net zero building east of the Mississippi. And the problem for solving for net zero is very interesting, and it really informed the design of the campus significantly. The solution for this particular building, which is 70,000 square feet, is that when you manage to make your building, this is a typical building, so optimal from a passive design standpoint, and you shrink the amount of energy that the building itself consumes, the lives of the people, which we all think about, becomes absolutely critical. So plug loads, which represents what people are doing on a day in and day out basis in their buildings, becomes half of the problem to getting to net zero. So it forces, again, different roles for designers to take on. You have to take on the role of being an educator. So we've gone and had working sessions with the teachers and explained to them why this works. We've tried to understand, go into different classrooms and see what's going on, and you'll be amazed to find going in a classroom and finding a professor has plugged in his own refrigerator because he just wants a refrigerator in his room. And that's a huge game changer in terms of energy consumption. We've also found that if you just serve one cold lunch a day to the students, you save an enormous amount of energy. So there's actual work that designers have to do with the occupants of the building to create a net zero building. There's also the question of how do you actually, in the case of this project, make up the deficit. So in this project, it was a continuous roof of photovoltaics, which becomes the skin of the building as well, and it wraps down. But there are slits and opening in that surface, which allows the interior of that building to be daylit for the vast majority of the day. So in all the hallways and other spaces, it's nearly 100% of the time. In the classrooms, it's between 90 and 100% of the time. So this is not only a more humane environment for people to learn and teach in, it's actually a place where people can, where the energy consumption is vastly reduced. The last thing we'll talk about is the way that information is delivered to the people who live there. So we've been working with Pentagram. These are real dashboard displays that'll be LCD screens. And what it's done is, how do you take the information that people need in order to reduce energy consumption and make it something understandable to second graders, third graders, other people? And what we've done is there will be real-time feedback for the energy consumption, and it'll actually operate like a competition. So you'll have the second graders competing against the third graders and other people. So in a particular classroom, they'll know how much they did on one day, how much they did on another day. There'll be a point system in terms of energy consumption, and there'll be a graphic of a tree so that in a given week or other places, seeing which classrooms are doing the best in terms of energy consumption. So it'll turn into something where the students will be the ones enforcing the amount of energy being consumed in the building. So it's another piece as a designer that you really have to attack strongly in order to achieve a net zero building. So what does all this different research mean? I mean, it's fundamental, I think, to our practice that research plays a huge role in this. When it comes to this campus, one of the first things you'll notice have a tilt to them that's roughly equal to the latitude, so around 30 to 40 degrees in the case of New York City, you will be able to generate far more energy and thus be able to deal with your net zero component far more intelligently than if you are not oriented in that particular manner. Beyond that, there's also the passive aspect of this, which is when you work with, let's say, bar buildings, having the long face, facing south and north, it's much easier to control daylighting. It's much easier to control the heat gain on the buildings. And so all of that is sort of embedded in the DNA of the campus so that the hard work of the planning does the hard work of passive design as much as possible and even puts the buildings in a great position for active energy generation as well. The other thing that we'll talk about and notice in all of these is that this is not a cloistered community. So if the campus is intended to be about intertwining into the tech system and intertwining even into the Roosevelt Island community, which is a big part of this as well, there's not a gate around this, there's not a quad that's at the center of the building, but rather it's a series of scooped green spaces that we designed in collaboration with field operations that orient themselves to the distant views of Midtown and Queens and other elements, and also create a real sort of vortex of energy which pulls people into the center of the campus. There's a layering here of teaching space, of research space and other elements that's folded also in terms of the section into the landscape as well. And then emerging from that are a series of very sort of multi-layered, multi-leveled buildings, some of which are large warehouses, some of which are taller, which have multiple functions as well. So you have residential on this site, you have school, you have conference center space, you have research space, all these different pieces. So you can see in the center of the campus that kind of layering, almost a patchwork quilt of a lot of active open spaces. So none of these are quads in the traditional sense, but the central signature space here is actually imagined as a boardwalk space with a grid of trees, which allows us to actually do a grid of geothermal underneath that space, which will help service the campus. And that boardwalk space then is the center of the campus, not just an open green space. And that's what we actually imagine to be the Woods Cantina. And this is about cafes and other elements at grade spilling out onto this space, creating a vibrant outdoor space that hopefully can match a vibrant academic space on the inside of these buildings. So that idea creation doesn't occur just in labs, but idea creation also occurs in outdoor spaces of the campus as well. This is the existing esplanade, and then figuring out how to tie in to that network, which is part of the 69 master plan that Johnson and Bergy did on the island, is also very And so there's a real sense of being sort of omnipresent in all of the research that's going on in a mixing of the different hubs. This is another sort of look or view of within the visioning of that space. And then this is in that space where the landscape is really peeling up and over you. So the Woods Cantina is to the left here, the materiality coming into the center of the space, a real mixing of people and a real permeability to the space. And even above you then there's also people moving. And then a very quick snapshot of the entirety of the sustainability So it's very much about those optimization for photovoltaic energy generation. There's geothermal systems. Those two combined will be the primary technologies for the net zero building. You see how the north-facing skylights will help diffusely light the space without too much overlighting, glare, or too much heat gain. And then water will be another piece of this. So looking seriously at the idea of sustainable sites, gray water collection for landscape irrigation, trying to mimic the natural ecology of the water runoffs by using rain gardens and other permeable surfaces. All of this is sort of intertwined into a single, we hope, compelling set of buildings which exemplify a 21st century way of approaching sustainability from scratch. So that's the advantage here, is we get to work from the ground up on the design of this. And then in the building, you see very much several of the principles of the Bell Lab. So the raised floor, which is a plenum which delivers all services, which allows for maximum flexibility in sort of moving and rotating people through. If there is direct sunlight, it'll be diffusely controlled through any sort of screens on the exterior, but the majority of it's going to be coming through the north face light, which, by the way, makes the great orientation for the photovoltaics to be tilted. All of it wants to be sort of integrated. So that's the vision of the campus. I think it's a compelling start, and we've been moving forward with Cornell since then as the master planning has continued, and we're very excited by the opportunity for this campus to not only symbolically mean something to the city in terms of a 21st century aspiration for job growth in the tech sector, but literally be an engine for change in the city, which I think is a very interesting challenge. So, thank you.
So we're open to questions from the floor for anybody.
On your corner project on Hilary Island, is there any strategy of improving the infrastructure? Is there a plan to do another bridge or tunnel or something to reach to the island?
The project has to go through ULURP, so an EIS, an environmental impact statement, is certainly part of that process. And the answer to that is the findings right now are not showing that there needs to be a new connection specifically to the island. I think the findings are very much going to focus on it's very engineering-oriented things, but trip generation, where people are coming from, are they coming by car, are they coming by subway, are they coming by the tram, other pieces like that, and then dealing with if the outcome of that study shows that there is something that has to be dealt with, then that's something we'll look at. But I don't think right now that there's any. One thing that is very.
Already stressed out infrastructure.
I'm sorry?
This infrastructure is already stressed out. Queensboro Bridge or the cable tram or subway or whatever. Unless you build something, your statistics are great, from 10,000 to 50,000 in 50 years or whatever. Unless that is coincided with the infrastructure, you know, it's irresponsible to keep on building something which will be a problem.
Yeah, I mean, infrastructure obviously has to grow with development, but I think the two have to be in balance, and that's something that Cornell is looking to, is part of and examining. One of the things that's been discussed very much is whether ferry service can be established to Roosevelt Island. What are the other modes of transportation? Looking at bike lanes being created, which the island does not have at all. So there's many levels in which I think we can deal with the way that traffic can come to and from the site. Without specifically, for example, building a new bridge.
I think your presentation would have done something in that direction.
I understand. Thank you.
I think it's wonderful to see the cities taking the initiative with the public-private projects, and I'm wondering if you can share with us any other. I assume that this is going to be an ongoing thing. What other things you're thinking about right now?
Sure. Well, actually, the Applied Sciences competition itself is ongoing. Just last week or the week before, we announced that general, what our group does at EDC is attempt to form these partnerships with private developers to reimagine what we can make of kind of underutilized city property. So that's something we're focused on every day.
Yes, in the back.
Yeah. Wondering how you, with Cornell, and also similar kind of future for the university in the kind of research capacity. With the Cornell side, you see the kind of momentum that's kind of public side, you see the incubator kind of one of the core, undergirding ethos of the project seems to be this kind of integration with industry. And I'm wondering how, when Reinhold Martin spoke this morning, the director of the Beale Center, Columbia University Research Center, he started by saying that, he's basically beholden to nothing. He can kind of, the kind of idea of academic freedom is still kind of alive in his practice. And I'm wondering how you reconcile the idea of the, whether or not it's a kind of naive vision of the kind of original university as a kind of place outside the market. But how do you kind of reconcile something like academic freedom, kind of, scholarly pursuits without a kind of market initiative or kind of market imperative, when this seems to be, a kind of, it's not just a kind of new Cornell campus, but it also seems to be potentially a kind of academic telos, kind of a new model for the university.
And I think a lot of it is actually going to be the way Cornell describes it, and obviously I'm not them, so forgive me if any of this is wrong, but it's really going to be generated by student interest, and that there are going to be lots of money coming in and lots of focus on kind of the pure research we talked about this morning. And then there are going to be people who are really focused on, a specific problem that they've either identified through previous work in the private sector or in work with the private sector at that moment that they're focused on attempting to solve. So I think their hope is that there's room for both of those things, and that if anything, maybe there's synergy there. But there's no, I think Cornell views itself as not beholden to those partners who are on the campus in terms of results, but more about kind of creating that ecosystem where they can both be beneficial to each other.
Yeah.
And so,
sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, and just to build on what Claire said, I think what we heard through the entire RFEI and RFP process from the many universities we talked to and even beforehand is that sort of the university of the model of the university as we know it today is somewhat exploding, and that more and more of these partnerships with commercial technology, with commercial companies, but even startup and established companies is going to become more and more important, just because of the way that research is evolving and the way that things do come to market and the way that things do make an impact. After they've finished with that basic research stage.
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to say one of the things they've talked about strategically is they want to be at every step of the growth cycle in the tech sector. So they simultaneously want to be in the business of incubating new ideas, but they also are very comfortable with the idea of mature companies like Google or others joining them in efforts as well. But there's a lot of steps in between those. So if an idea is in the incubator, they want to figure out how they can get that person seed money and potentially even be a vital partner in finding the first office space in Long Island City. And then watching that person grow, and then that person joins them actually then as a mature candidate on their own campus as a company. So I think they would see it strategically as about that kind of sequence and finding a role for themselves to play in every step of that sequence.
Nonetheless, I think that to respond directly to your question, I think that the value systems of industry and value systems of universities have traditionally been not entirely overlapping. And there will be invariably, I think, in the course of the development of these partnerships and these relationships, there will be serious issues that will relate to the ownership of intellectual property, conflicts of interest, the ways in which the certain core values of the university are maintained, and academic freedom is not the only one, but the question that relates to open communication of ideas, for example, when you're dealing with companies that want proprietary interests, there are many, many, many issues that I think one can deal with, but which will pose potential difficulties for these collaborative processes between industry and the universities. Although I think clearly we're going in a direction in which they're going to have to work through those problems. But they do represent real pitfalls, I think, for universities. So I think alerting us to that is an important flag, warning flag. Yeah.
I think it may have even been in this room, but I heard a few years ago, I think also from someone at EEC. Before I say any of that, let me just say I fully support the idea of a campus, engineering campus, as a logical fit for New York City to increase its economy. But the example was given a few years ago of the incredible amount of biotech research being done in New York City, and if anything, the failure within New York City to tie the innovation of those biotech centers into job creation in the 5 boroughs due to spaces and due to the types of offshoots that start to employ people, need lab spaces, need physical spaces to develop it, and why can't New York City be like Central Jersey and the drug companies there? I was just wondering whether there's any thought with the new engineering campus about the suitability of New York City to absorb the spin-off businesses that come from that. It's one thing if they're computer-based internet companies and people with glasses, you know, and their laptops, and something else altogether if you start to then require the type of flexible industrial spaces and startup spaces. And curious to think how Cornell is thinking about that, or how that sort of, those steps out of the university are being envisioned, if they are, and how the city is responding to it as well.
So in terms of what you said about biotech, that was a challenge for us when we thought about the biotech industry, is that we need a very specific type of wet space infrastructure that New York City doesn't currently have. So growing those smaller companies into larger companies in New York City was particularly challenging. When we talk about the companies that we expect will probably grow out of the Applied Sciences campuses, it will be more about the laptop type of engineering and things, and even in the light and industrial manufacturing, that's real estate stock that New York City has, and that we have resources that can be used to address. So I think in that sense, when we actually put out the RFEI and the RFP, we said specifically we weren't focused on biosciences. Not that we precluded it, but we had a lot of other work that we were doing focused on that as a city, and that we understand that there are challenges to growing those types of buildings here. And I would,
yeah, that dovetailed really well with Cornell, because Cornell wasn't interested in specifically investing for this particular project in biomedical research. They have that. Cornell Weill does some of that. Ithaca does some of that. And their focus was very much also on the tech sector. So even the Healthier Living Hub, that hub is much more about information, data, and other things that are relevant to the healthcare industry, not specifically about the kind of research like wet lab research and industrial manufacturing that would be necessary. So none of that is on the campus.
Before I ask the question, I just wanted to know, point of clarification, how did this Cornell compare to the Manhattanville expansion of Columbia as far as scale and size? I think it's $6 billion here at Columbia.
Yeah, so this is smaller. It's a 10-acre site approximately versus Manhattanville is 20.
It's far larger.
So it's almost twice. Columbia's expansion is almost twice the size of what we discussed.
Yeah, and then on a square footage basis, it sounds like it's 3 times the size. So it is smaller in scale. And I think I remember seeing the numbers for Columbia that tripling kind of holds across numbers of students and faculty as well. But obviously, Columbia is a number of different departments and focuses, and we're talking at the Cornell campus really only about engineering.
So, okay, I had to preface the question. As an alum of both of these institutions, having spent 4 years in Ithaca, and then just last year finishing this one, and coming out of the hole, and trust me, coming out of the hole $100,000 later for this one, and for the other one I'm still paying my loans back,
I'm thinking in the last decade, all of these universities are expanding and multiplying and growing up and out, and my loans are going up and up and up, and I don't see the offset of this coupling with industry, where the young minds are being tapped as a resource by people who need innovation and tuition. Thereby, I mean, it would make sense if you told me, hey, Audi's going to step in and you're only going to have to pay half your costs and they're going to benefit off your ideas. You know, maybe you could sell me on that, but in some ways it's prohibitively expensive to go to school because of, I would say, these projects, or vice versa, these projects are a result of the prohibitive expense. So I would just like if you could talk about that correlation.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a complicated question and something that obviously is like a national issue, right? We've all heard about tuition prices are increasing at
the city
a huge rate, and it's not just in New York, it's everywhere. Cornell has been, I think, really mindful about those kinds of issues, and one of their primary goals here is to have this entire campus, the development and the endowment, funded by new fundraising efforts. So I'm sure everybody heard they already got a $350 million donation to pay for the construction, because what they don't want to do is create a drain on their existing endowment and, you know, put themselves in a situation where they do have to then raise tuitions. This campus, obviously, PhDs don't pay tuitions, they're paid, in fact. I assume the master students will be paying some amount of money. I don't know if they've worked out the cost structure, but what I can say is that Cornell's goal here is to create a campus that is financially self-sustaining and that is, affordable to a wide range of.
Well, maybe a more astute question is to say, since Cornell's a SUNY, it's exactly, 3 of the 7 schools are state funded, so, and the 4 are private. Is this one of Cornell's state-funded SUNY schools?
No.
This is not.
No.
Okay.
This is not one of the land-grant
We
institutions.
have time for one more question. Yes, right here.
Just on the same lines, how are you dealing with immigration? Because you can create all these programs.
And as a matter of fact, those programs are already in one way or another out there, but then when the students are done, if they cannot stay in the country, and so unless there is an immigration policy that is changed dramatically, this is not going to work.
Well, I mean, let me just jump in on that quickly. I mean, it's not how we alone are dealing with immigration, it's how the country is dealing with immigration. I mean, it is the visa policies that have been handed down over the last 10 or 15 years, which have been highly restrictive and overly restrictive when we need talent from abroad. So to the extent that we close off the pipeline of these extraordinarily able people, or we send them back after they have completed their degrees, even though they want to stay within the United States, continue their work or their jobs, we are just harming ourselves, and we're harming our universities. And there isn't any question that the immigration policies that were followed over the Bush years were extraordinarily restrictive for these universities, and for a period of time quite harmful. We're in such demand at the moment that we nonetheless get large numbers of people anyway who are extremely talented. But that will not go on forever, especially when these universities in other countries begin to get better and better when they continue to keep their youngsters at home. So I think you've identified one of the important issues I actually talk about in this book and in others, that if you don't have a much more open visa policy about the talent that will come from around the world to work here, if people want to, we're going to damage the possibilities of greatness in this kind of campus or any of the great universities.
And just to build on that, I know that Mayor Bloomberg has been incredibly outspoken about the need to increase H-1B visas and to keep talent in New York City or in the United States once they've been educated, because the reverse brain drain is increasingly hurting our country. And so while it's not necessarily part of this initiative to be addressed, because we are beholden to the national politics of it, New York City has been doing everything they can to try to address the issue on the national level.
So let me say that we are running a little late, but I want to thank you again for coming and listening to our guests and panelists. And I think there's going to be a 15-minute break, and then we'll be
no break.
Yes.
Going on
Thanks. Nice to meet you. I'd love to get a copy of your presentation.